Hey everyone, welcome back to Wizardium. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if all four Hogwarts Founders ghosts raised Harry and Hermione? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1, The Ones the Castle Kept the Night It Happened, Hogwarts Dreamed. That was the only way anyone who felt it could describe it afterward, a great slow shudder that moved through the castle from foundations to battlements, like a sleeping animal flinching at some distant sound. The torches in the empty corridors flickered without wind. The lake went still and glassy when it should have been choppy with autumn waves. In the astronomy tower, a brass orrery that hadn't moved in 200 years made a single quiet revolution and stopped. No one was awake to see any of it. The students were in their dormitories, deep in the particular exhausted sleep that only comes in late October, when the cold has finally settled in for the season and every warm blanket becomes a small miracle. The professors were in their quarters. Dumbledore's office was dark, but the ghosts felt it. Nearly headless Nick was drifting along the 7th floor corridor, doing what he usually did in the small hours, rehearsing with considerable theatrical flourish, what he wished he'd said to Mistress Gruntley Foss in 1492 when the feeling moved through him like a wave through water. He stopped, his ruff settled. For a long moment he simply floated there, head tilted at its improbable angle, and listened to something that wasn't quite sound. Then he turned and drifted, faster than he usually allowed himself to move in public, toward the east wing where the founders' portraits hung. He arrived to find the portraits empty, all four of them. The great gilt-framed canvas where Godric Gryffindor usually stood in his lion-crested armor empty. Rowena Ravenclaw's portrait where she was typically depicted mid-thought, one long finger pressed to her temple empty. Helga Hufflepuff surrounded by her painted herb garden empty. And Salazar Slytherin, robes dark as deep water, face carefully composed in the expression of a man who has never been surprised by anything in his life empty. Nick pressed a white hand to where his heart would be. Whatever had shaken the castle, it was bad enough to call them out of their frames. In 900 years of haunting these halls, he had never seen that. He found them in the entrance hall, gathered above the great doors like a storm gathering at the ceiling, 4 columns of cold silver light that moved with something very close to agitation. They weren't speaking. They were listening, or rather, they were reaching outward in the way old magic does when it senses a wound in the world, spreading through the castle's stones like roots through earth, reading something that hadn't arrived yet. "What's happened?" Nick asked, floating up beside them. "Quiet," Rowena said. She was the most translucent of the four. Something about the intensity with which she haunted made her seem more present, more solid, even though her edges blurred at the sleeves and hem. Her eyes were fixed on the doors. He used the curse, the one that was never supposed to exist. Nick understood. The whole wizarding world had felt it in one way or another, that sharp, fundamental wrongness, like a crack in glass, like a word spoken in a church that had no business being there. He'd felt it as a flinch up in the 7th floor corridor. He hadn't understood what it was until now. "Voldemort," he said softly. "He's gone," Godric said. His voice was not quiet, it never was, but there was something underneath the volume that was very close to shock, and on Godric Gryffindor's face shock looked strange and uncomfortable, like a hat that didn't fit. "The curse went back, I don't know how. I don't know what James and Lily did, or whether it was Lily's sacrifice alone, but it went back and he's diminished. Not dead, but gone enough. The child survived," Helga said. It wasn't a question. She always knew these things before she could explain how. Her voice was the warmest of the four, even like this, even translucent and ancient and made of cold light, and right now it was threaded through with something that sounded alarmingly close to tears. "The Potter boy survived." Salazar hadn't said anything yet. He was looking at the doors with an expression that could have been disdain if you didn't know him well enough to see the careful work he was doing to keep it there. "And so Dumbledore will collect the child," he said. "Take him to some Muggle relative, no doubt, because that's what Dumbledore does. He tidies things away for later use." "He'll take him to the sister," Rowena said. "Petunia Evans. I've read Dumbledore's correspondence. He's been writing to Lily's sister for months, setting the groundwork, blood protection, the sister's protection. He has the whole thing planned out." "He had it planned," Godric said, "for the possibility that Lily and James both died. He didn't account for." He stopped. He turned, and all four of them turned because the great doors were opening. Albus Dumbledore walked through them carrying a bundle of blankets. He was alone. No Hagrid, not yet. That would come later, with the motorcycle and the borrowed memory of a flight through the dark. He had apparated directly to the edge of the wards, walked the path alone, and now he stood in the entrance hall with the sleeping child in his arms and his half-moon glasses slightly fogged from the cold, looking more tired than Nick had ever seen him look. He was also, quite clearly, aware that the founders were in the room. He stopped walking. He looked up. "I wondered if you'd felt it," he said in the tone of a man who had been hoping he was wrong. "Of course we felt it," Godric said. He descended, not physically, he had no body to descend with, but his light moved downward through the air until he was level with Dumbledore's face, which was as close to looming as a ghost could manage. "The whole castle felt it. What are you doing here? Why do you have the boy?" "I needed somewhere to think," Dumbledore said, which was such an obvious deflection that even Helga made a sound. "You're bringing him to the sister," Rowena said flatly. "You've already decided." Dumbledore looked at her. In 900 years of interactions between those two intelligences, Nick had never once been able to determine which of them was smarter. The looks they exchanged sometimes felt like watching two chess grandmasters play a game that hadn't been invented yet. The blood protection is the most reliable. The blood protection, Salazar said, moving forward, requires the boy to live as a ward of that woman in a Muggle household, cut off from everything he is, everything his parents were, the entire legacy of his blood and his name and his world. He paused. Even I find that distasteful. That made Dumbledore blink. There is no other option, Dumbledore said carefully. He needs to be safe, Helga said. She floated down to stand in her way beside Dumbledore, and she looked at the child in his arms with an expression that made the temperature in the room feel inexplicably warmer. Give him to me, Albus. You cannot hold him, Helga. I know what I am. Her voice was gentle and absolutely immovable. Put him down on the stairs, right there, and let me look at him. Dumbledore hesitated. In all the ways that mattered, Albus Dumbledore was not a man who hesitated, but something about the four of them, gathered and luminous and quietly insistent in the entrance hall of the school they'd built with their hands and their magic, and a thousand-year argument that had never entirely resolved, made him set the bundle down on the third step of the great staircase. Harry Potter was 14 months old and deeply asleep. He had dark hair that was already making a spirited attempt to defy gravity, and a small pink face with a smudge on the forehead, a mark still fresh and raw that would scar into the shape of a bolt of lightning, and his hands were curled loosely at his sides like a person who has never in his life had to hold on to anything out of fear. Helga looked at him for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "He can't go to her, Albus. He cannot grow up in a house where he isn't loved. I've known since Lily came to us that this child would need everything we have to give him. And I am telling you now, as clearly as I can, putting him in a house without love will break something in him that no power on earth can fix, not even the power in this castle." The silence was long. "Hogwarts cannot house an infant," Dumbledore said, but his voice had changed. The certainty in it had developed cracks. "Hogwarts has housed stranger things than a baby," Godric said. "It's housed Peeves for 900 years, and the man can juggle flaming suits of armor. That's not the same, Albus." Rowena's voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. No force, no anger, just precision. "The castle wants this. Can you not feel it? Stop thinking about blood wards and political optics and whatever 10-move plan you've been constructing since this evening. Stop, listen to the building." Dumbledore went very still. The castle breathed around them. It was the only word for it, a long, slow, almost architectural exhalation that moved through the stones and the portraits and the banners, that made the candles burn higher for just a moment, that sent a warm current of air spiraling down the staircase and ruffling the edge of the baby's blanket. Dumbledore looked down at Harry. Harry slept on, unbothered, one tiny fist uncurling against the stone step with absolute confidence. "I'll need to make arrangements," Dumbledore said finally. All four founders looked at each other. "Yes," Helga said, "you will." The arrangements took 3 weeks. There were considerable logistical complications which Dumbledore handled with the particular brand of creative ambiguity that had characterized his administration of the school for the past 30 years. The official record, the one that the Ministry's Department of Magical Records filed away without examining too closely, stated that Harry James Potter was in the care of a designated magical guardian, placement approved under Clause 7 of the Child Magical Welfare Act of 1951, reviewed annually. The name of the guardian was listed as the Hogwarts School Trust, which was technically a legal entity, though no one had ever attempted to use it as a child guardian before. When the ministry clerk processed the paperwork, she frowned at it for a long moment, shrugged, and moved on to the next file. There was a great deal of paperwork in the wake of Voldemort's fall, and one confusing placement document wasn't worth the headache. McGonagall, who Dumbledore told, sat across from him in his office for a full minute without speaking and then said, "The founders, all four of them." "Yes, including Slytherin." "Yes." Another pause. "And the child is currently sleeping in the school, in the suite of rooms that were formerly used for quarantining students with dragonpox. They've been extensively renovated. Helga has opinions about interior decoration that I wasn't previously aware of." McGonagall stood up, gathered her robes with the precision of a woman holding herself together by sheer force of habit, said "Good night, Albus," and left the office. She requested a transfer to be Harry's primary day-to-day caregiver the next morning, which Dumbledore granted immediately and gratefully. So Harry Potter grew up in Hogwarts Castle. He had a set of rooms on the 4th floor, warm ones, with tall windows that caught the morning light, and a small garden terrace that Helga had coaxed into blooming through some mechanism that McGonagall chose not to examine too closely. He had McGonagall, who was exacting and loving in precisely the way a person is when they were never going to admit they were loving, who taught him to read before he was 4, and introduced him to chess with the obvious intention of raising a worthy opponent. He had the house elves, who adored him with a ferocity that occasionally alarmed visiting professors. He had the whole enormous moving castle, its staircases and secret passages and rooms that appeared for reasons of their own, all of it familiar to him in the way that a childhood home becomes familiar, not studied but felt in the bones. And he had his guardians. Godric arrived most often in the early morning when Harry was small, appearing in his portrait frame in the sitting room with a dramatic flourish and a new story. He had a spectacular and largely fabricated personal history, and Harry absorbed all of it with the bright-eyed credulity of a very small child and the sharp follow-up questions of a child who had also been raised by Rowena Ravenclaw, which combination frequently left Godric sputtering. He taught Harry dueling theory at 4. He taught him wandless magic at 5, not systematically, nothing like that, just by doing it in front of him constantly until Harry started doing it back, the way children learn language, by immersion and imitation. He also taught him purely by example that showing off was its own reward. Helga was the one who came at night. She was the warmest presence, the one who understood, perhaps better than the others, what it meant for a child to grow up without the particular weight of living parents. She never made it a subject of grief, never sat Harry down and explained what he'd lost. She simply made the loss lighter by filling the space around it with stories about Hufflepuff students she'd taught, about the castle's early years when it was still half-built and everyone was improvising, about the time Godric had accidentally turned his horse into a very confused armchair and had to live with the results for a week. She made Harry feel like he was part of a long story, not a parenthetical tragedy within one. She also grew things. Harry's small terrace garden, by the time he was 6, was producing vegetables that the kitchens used with enormous enthusiasm, and flowers that apparently had mild magical properties that Helga attributed to the soil, but that McGonagall suspected had more to do with the warmth of a 1,000-year-old ghost's attention. Rowena arrived on a schedule. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, Saturday mornings, and whenever Harry said something intellectually interesting at dinner, which he learned early enough to deploy strategically. She was the most demanding of the 4. She set him exercises in magical theory at an age when most children were reading picture books about first one days, corrected his reasoning with a directness that would have been unkind from anyone less clearly invested in his being correct, and had what Harry privately considered the most useful policy of any of his guardians. She answered his questions honestly, even when the honest answer was complicated. When he was 5 and asked why Voldemort had killed his parents, she told him carefully, completely, with all the relevant context and without softening the parts that were painful. When he was 6 and asked why he couldn't just go live in the village with the other children, she told him that too. The world knew his name, knew his scar, and there were people in it who would use that knowledge in ways that would be dangerous to him. She made it factual rather than frightening. She made him feel like someone who deserved to understand his own situation. She also taught him 5 languages by the time he was 8. He used exactly 2 of them with any regularity, but Rowena considered this acceptable. And then there was Salazar. Salazar Slytherin arrived when he chose to, on no particular schedule, and usually said something that made Harry think for several days. He had been the most opposed of the 4 to any kind of emotional entanglement with the child. Harry knew this now, though he hadn't when he was small, and yet it was Salazar who had the most acute understanding of what Harry actually needed, perhaps because Salazar had always been better at identifying needs than admitting he cared about fulfilling them. He taught Harry legilimency when Harry was 7. Not fully, not the invasive kind, but the basic skill of reading a room, reading a face, understanding what wasn't being said. He taught it by playing a game he called the Liar's Court, in which one of them would make a statement and the other had to determine whether it was true, supported only by observation. Harry was very bad at it for approximately 2 weeks and then devastatingly good at it for the rest of his childhood, which Salazar clearly considered an acceptable outcome. He also taught Harry to speak to snakes. This happened by accident. Harry was 8. A garden snake had found its way in from Helga's terrace, and Harry had said very clearly, "Where did you come from?" in what he thought was English but was apparently not, and both he and the snake had been equally surprised by the response. Salazar, who had been present and whose response to this discovery was to go completely still for a moment in a way that no one else would have identified as emotion, but which Harry, trained by the Liar's Court, clocked immediately, had simply said, "Good, now ask it what it eats." They had a long and very satisfying conversation about mice. Salazar never called it a gift. He called it a language, which Harry appreciated because it meant there was no reason to treat it as remarkable. It was simply something he knew, one of many things. Hermione Granger arrived at Hogwarts on a Wednesday in November, 2 years after Harry, and the castle received her with the same quiet recognition it had shown him, that long, warming breath through the stones, that particular quality of attention from the building, as though something large and old and very patient was turning to look. She was 3 years old. She was wearing a hospital bracelet and a coat that was a size too big, and had the very precise, very controlled expression of a child who has cried so much and so recently that she has temporarily run out of crying but is fairly sure there's more where that came from. She was holding a book. It was upside down because she'd grabbed it in the dark and hadn't noticed, but she was holding it like a shield. Dumbledore brought her as he'd brought Harry. The circumstances were different, not a Dark Lord's curse but a motorway accident, sudden and senseless and thoroughly, miserably ordinary. but the essential situation was the same. A child with no family, no safe place to go, and a magical signature so strong it had set off alarms in the ministry's accidental magic monitoring office 3 times in the week since her parents had died. The ministry wanted to place her with the closest magical relative, except that the closest magical relative was a second cousin in Aberdeen who didn't want her and had made this extremely clear. Dumbledore had, again, made arrangements. He brought her to the entrance hall at 8:30 in the evening, and she stood there with her upside-down book and her too big coat and looked up at the floating candles and the moving staircases and the 4 columns of silver light that were gathering at the ceiling, and she said very clearly, "Those are ghosts." "Yes," Dumbledore said, "real ones, very real ones." She looked at the ghosts looked at her. Harry Potter came barreling down the stairs in his pajamas because McGonagall had told him company was coming, and he'd been unable to sleep, dark hair everywhere, green eyes bright, 5 years old and absolutely certain that nothing happening in this castle could be bad enough to worry about. And he arrived at the bottom of the staircase, skidded slightly on the flagstones and stared at the girl with the upside-down book. "Hello," he said. She looked at him, looked at his scar. Looked at his pajamas, which had small golden snitches on them that were actually moving. "Your pajamas are flying," she said. "Yeah, Helga enchanted them. I'm Harry. Hermione. Do you want to see the library? It's enormous. There's a whole section on the 2nd floor that has books that read themselves out loud, and another section that Rowena says I'm not allowed in yet, but the door unlocks for me anyway because the castle likes me." Hermione looked at the enormous staircase. Looked at the 4 founders. Looked at Dumbledore, who was watching the whole exchange with the expression of a man who has, against all odds, made a correct decision. Then she looked back at Harry. "Yes," she said, "but I'm going to put my book down first. I think it's upside down." "It is," Harry confirmed. "It's been bothering me since you got here." They went to the library. Hermione didn't cry again that night, though she did in the following weeks, and it was Helga who sat with her through those times, not talking, just present, warm and patient and unhurried in the way that a ghost who has been waiting 900 years has learned to be unhurried about sorrow. She made Hermione feel that grief had no deadline, that there was no correct pace for it. That the castle would still be here, warm and full of floating candles and books that read themselves, whenever Hermione came up for air. Rowena, who had watched Hermione move through the library that first night with the particular quality of attention, usually reserved for people who discover something they've been looking for without knowing they were looking, announced the next morning that the child's education would begin immediately. "She's 3, McGonagall said. "She's already reading at a 7-year-old level," Rowena said, in the tone of someone reporting a fact about the weather. "She's teaching herself by reading the books wrong way up. Give her something harder." McGonagall gave her something harder. Hermione read it in a weekend and came back with 11 questions, 7 of which Rowena considered genuinely interesting, and 1 of which actually required Rowena to think before she answered, which hadn't happened to her in decades and which she found, to her own slight alarm, deeply satisfying. Hermione Granger grew into a person who was simultaneously the most prepared child Rowena had ever taught and the most genuinely curious, which was rarer than it sounded. Most prepared people stopped being curious because preparation could substitute for discovery, but Hermione seemed to find that the more she knew, the bigger the territory of what she didn't know became, and this delighted rather than frustrated her. She could be impatient, sharp-tongued, and so relentlessly correct that it occasionally made Godric hide behind his portrait frame to avoid being right at her. She felt things deeply and protected herself from knowing it. She remembered everything and sometimes forgot to eat. She was, in short, Rowena's favorite, a fact that Rowena denied and that everyone, including Rowena, knew perfectly well. She was also the person who made Salazar uncomfortable in a way that no one else ever had, and it took Harry 3 years to understand why. He figured it out when he was 8, watching Salazar teach Hermione the basics of occlumency. She'd asked for the lesson, the way she asked for everything, with a prepared argument and a list of reasons, and Salazar was teaching her with the same particular focused attention he gave to everything that he considered important. Harry, watching from the doorway, realized that Salazar was looking at Hermione the same way he looked at things he loved, and this created a problem because Salazar Slytherin believed, or had believed for 900 years, that Muggle-born witches and wizards were lesser. Hermione was Muggle-born, and she was quite clearly the furthest possible thing from lesser. Harry watched his guardian sit with this contradiction every single day without ever, in all the years of Harry's childhood, resolving it out loud. Salazar never said the word mudblood in their home. He had never used it around them at all. Harry suspected this was more about Helga's reaction than personal conviction, at least in the beginning, but there was a difference between not saying a thing and not believing it, and Harry was too well trained in the liar's court not to notice. He brought it up once when he was 9. Just Salazar and him in the late evening when the fire in the sitting room was burning low, and Salazar was in the portrait frame with the expression he wore when he was thinking about something he didn't like. "You don't know what to do about Hermione," Harry said. The expression on the portrait shifted barely, the way water shifts when something passes under it. "I don't know what you mean." You believed something for 900 years and then she was here and she's Hermione and it doesn't fit. Harry sat with his legs crossed on the hearthrug, comfortable in the specific way children are comfortable with people they're not afraid of. It bothers you. A long pause. You're too observant, Salazar said. You taught me to be. Another pause longer. I was. He stopped, started again. There are things I believed. Things I built into this school, into the way magic itself works in these walls. Things that I am reconsidering because of her. He looked at Harry directly, which was the thing Salazar did when he wanted to make sure something was heard properly. And because of you, if you want to know the truth of it. Harry sat with that for a while. Because of me. You carry two bloodlines that should, by everything I once believed, be in conflict. You're a Potter, which is about as Gryffindor a name as exists on the planet, and you're, Salazar paused again. I've watched you for 9 years. You are the most naturally Slytherin child I have ever taught, and I have been teaching children since before your entire family tree existed. The way you think, the way you calculate, the patience underneath the nerve. Something moved across his face that was nearly a smile, or would have been if Salazar Slytherin had been the kind of man who showed those easily. I built sorting systems to separate these things, and you are walking proof that they aren't separate. They never were. Harry didn't say anything for a moment. Then, do you wish you'd sorted it out earlier when you were alive? Every day, Salazar said simply. It was, Harry recognized, the most honest thing his guardian had ever said. He didn't push it further. He just sat by the fire until the logs burned down to ash, and Salazar stayed in the frame, which was the closest either of them would come to sitting together. The years of childhood passed the way years in a magical castle do, simultaneously endless and astonishingly quick, marked not by seasons so much as by the rhythm of terms and the shifting population of students who filled the halls each September and departed each June, leaving the castle quieter and somehow fuller in the in-between. Harry and Hermione were educated alongside the older students for most things. Rowena had no patience for age-appropriate curriculum, only ability-appropriate curriculum, and lived alongside them in the sense that the castle's halls and common rooms were accessible to them, though they had their own rooms, their own spaces, their own particular relationship with the building that none of the students they moved among quite understood. They knew about the Chamber of Secrets, of course, because Salazar told them. He told it the way he told most things that involved his own worst impulses, clinically, without emotional weight, in the manner of someone reporting a historical event in which he happened to have been personally involved. There was a chamber, he'd built it, there was a monster in it, he'd put that there too. The intent, he said, was to have a mechanism for removing Muggle-borns from the school because he had believed, and here he said it without softening it, that Muggle-borns were a contamination. Hermione listened to this with the specific quality of attention she brought to things that were both interesting and upsetting. Then she said, "And now, Salazar said, I have been watching you read for 6 years and I have revised my position significantly. That's a very Slytherin way of admitting you were wrong. I am a Slytherin," he said. It comes with the territory. They knew about the Philosopher's Stone, because Rowena had noticed Dumbledore's unusual security arrangements in a corridor on the 3rd floor, and had discussed them at dinner with the pointed exasperation of someone who considers theatrical hiding places a personal insult. They knew about the Triwizard Cup in the trophy room, because Godric had won it, and liked to mention this fact at every available opportunity and several unavailable ones. They knew about Voldemort, his history, his methods, his obsession with Harry, his diminished but not extinguished presence somewhere at the edge of the magical world. They knew it the way children who have been told the truth know things, clearly, completely, with all the fear taken out of it by the fact that the fear had been given a shape and a name and a set of known weaknesses, which is the only real remedy for the specific horror of the unknown. They were not afraid of him. This was perhaps the most significant thing about them, and the most unusual. Every other child of their generation who knew Voldemort's history knew it wrapped in dread, in the hush and flinch of adults who'd lived through the war. Harry and Hermione knew it wrapped in the measured, analytical, occasionally frustrated commentary of 4 people who had collectively been making decisions about magical power for 1,000 years, and had many opinions about where Tom Riddle had gone wrong. His fundamental error, Rowena had said once, when Harry was 9 and asking about Horcruxes the word had come up, she'd explained more actions request aborted right the next chapter now. Chapter 2, what they were made of. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry and Hermione were not on it. This was Godric's fault. You were born here, he'd said 3 days before term when the subject of the train had come up over breakfast. You grew up here, why would you take a train to a place you already live? Because it's traditional, Hermione said. She was eating toast and reading simultaneously, which she'd been doing since she was 5 and which had stopped alarming McGonagall around year 3. The train journey is part of the experience. You meet people, you establish social bonds, it's sociologically important. I'll tell you what's sociologically important, arriving at your school on horseback. Which is what I did every year for 40 years and no one ever forgot meeting me. You didn't have a school yet for most of those years, Harry pointed out. You were just a man on a horse, a magnificent horse. You turned it into a chair. Godric waved this away. The point stands, the train is unnecessary, you're 11, not tourists. So instead of the Hogwarts Express, Harry and Hermione arrived at the start of term feast the way they always had, by walking down from the 4th floor through the familiar moving staircases, through the entrance hall, and into the Great Hall, where 412 students from years 2 through 7 were already seated. And where the first years were just filing in through the side doors looking terrified and overwhelmed, and not at all prepared for the sight of 2 children, their own age, walking in through the main entrance like they owned the place, which in a very real sense they did. The hall went quiet in the particular way large spaces go quiet when everyone realizes something unusual is happening simultaneously. The first years stopped moving. The older students, many of whom had been here long enough to know Harry and Hermione by sight, had passed them in corridors, seen them in the library, watched them practice dueling on the lawn, went very still with the specific attention of people watching something they've been anticipating for years. McGonagall, standing at the front of the hall with the sorting hat and the list of first-year names, looked at Harry and Hermione with an expression that was almost fond but not quite, in the way that most of her expressions toward them were almost something but not quite, because openly demonstrating affection would require acknowledging that she had it and she had principles about that. "Mr. Potter, Miss Granger," she said, "you're early." "You said 7 o'clock, Hermione said. "I said the feast was at 7, the sorting begins at 7. "Right, we're early." McGonagall pressed her lips together, gestured with the precise economy of movement that characterized everything she did toward the Gryffindor table. The message was clear: sit down, be less conspicuous, we'll deal with you in due course. Harry and Hermione sat at the end of the Gryffindor table, which caused a ripple of shifting and shuffling as the students nearest them rearranged themselves, not away from them, but closer, with the instinctive gravitational pull that people who are interesting exert on the curious. A boy with red hair and freckles, and the particular expression of someone who has something he desperately wants to say, leaned across the table, before they'd even fully settled into their seats. "You're Harry Potter," he said. "I am," Harry agreed. "I'm Ron Weasley. My mum knows Dumbledore. My dad works at the Ministry. I've got 6 brothers. Well, 5 brothers and 1 sister, except George says. Anyway, is it true you can actually speak to snakes?" Harry considered him. Ron Weasley had an open face, the kind that was genuinely terrible at hiding what was going on behind it, and what was going on behind it right now was a very pure and uncomplicated version of excited curiosity, no calculation in it whatsoever. Harry, who had been trained since early childhood to read the calculations in people's faces, found the total absence of one almost refreshing. "Yes," he said. "Brilliant," Ron said with complete sincerity, and then turned to Hermione. "And you're Hermione Granger, you actually live here in the castle?" "Also yes," Hermione said. "Do the founders actually, I mean the ghosts, do they actually talk to us?" "Yes, teach us things," Harry added. "Also yes, Merlin's." Ron stopped himself, glanced at a girl 2 seats down who had the look of a sister who could hear him swearing from across a building, redirected. "That's the most extraordinary thing I've ever heard, and my family has a flying car." This was the beginning of a friendship that none of them would have predicted, but all of them would, in retrospect, recognize as inevitable. Ron Weasley was the first person Harry had met who responded to everything unusual about his life with uncomplicated enthusiasm, rather than awe or nervousness, or the particular calculating warmth of people who wanted to be associated with Harry Potter for reasons that had nothing to do with Harry. The sorting hat came out. The first years went through in the standard progression of trembling and relief and occasional jubilation. The hat talked, it always talked, and what it said was occasionally interesting, though most of its commentary this year was fairly standard until it came to a boy named Neville Longbottom, who was spherical with anxiety and sat on the stool for nearly 4 minutes while the hat apparently had what sounded like a spirited internal debate. Harry watched this with sympathy. The hat eventually said Gryffindor. Neville exhaled like a man who has survived something, and life continued. Then McGonagall looked at her list and said, "Granger, Hermione." The hall went quiet again. This was a different quality of quiet from before, more focused, more freighted, the quiet of a room where everyone knows something significant is happening but isn't sure exactly what shape significance is going to take. Hermione walked to the front of the hall as though she had done this 100 times, which she effectively had. She'd watched 100 sortings from the staff table, from the sides, from the doorways and the gallery, had studied the hat's process with the same methodical attention she brought to every system she encountered. She sat on the stool. McGonagall placed the hat on her head. The hat said nothing for almost a full minute. Then it said in the carrying voice it used for announcements, "Now." "This is interesting." A murmur moved through the hall. The hat continued, apparently unbothered by the audience. "I have been sorting students for 900 years, and I have never, not once in 9 centuries, met a student whom all 4 houses want with equal and sincere urgency. Usually there's a preference, a leaning, a primary gravity, but you," it sounded almost affronted, "you are genuinely, comprehensively, maddeningly balanced. Ravenclaw wants your mind. Hufflepuff wants your loyalty, Gryffindor wants your nerve, and Slytherin, Slytherin wants your ambition, which you've done a remarkably good job of hiding under the ambition to simply know things, but I can see it, young lady, the ambition to change things, significant things." Hermione, to her credit, looked completely calm. Harry, watching from the table, could see the small, deliberate breath she took through her nose, The one she took when she was thinking carefully and wanted no one to notice she was thinking. Well, the hat said finally, since I must choose and since you've been shaped by all four equally, I'll choose the one whose founder chose you first. The one who sat with you on your worst nights when you were 3 years old and made you feel like the castle wanted you here. Hufflepuff. The Hufflepuff table erupted. Hermione handed the hat back to McGonagall with a composed expression that Harry recognized as the face she wore when she was surprised, and had decided to process it privately. She walked to the Hufflepuff table and sat down, and a girl with a round face and a wide smile, Hannah Abbott, Harry would learn, immediately slid over to make room and said, "We've been hoping you'd end up with us," with such genuine delight that the composed expression cracked slightly in the direction of pleased. "Potter," Harry, McGonagall said. The quiet this time was enormous, complete. Even the enchanted ceiling, which had been doing its usual impression of the night sky outside, seemed to hold still. Harry walked to the front without hurrying. He was not performing calm, he was calm, actually calm, in the bone-deep way of someone who has never been taught to be afraid of a room's attention. He sat on the stool, the hat dropped over his ears. The hat didn't speak for a long moment. Then in his head, not out loud, it said, "Oh, it's you. It's me." Harry thought back, 9 years in this building and I've never sorted you. I've been curious. A pause. "Your friend surprised me. You won't." No, I know exactly where you belong. I've known since you were 5 years old, and Salazar Slytherin told me privately through the magic we share that he'd never met a more naturally Slytherin child in 9 centuries of instruction. And Godric told me the same thing, using the word Gryffindor, and somehow they were both right and neither of them was entirely right, and that's the most interesting thing about you. Another pause. "But there's something else. Something underneath the cleverness and the nerve and the patience. What do you actually want, Harry Potter?" Harry thought about it honestly. Not the version of honest that was a performance, but the real version, the thing underneath the training and the languages and the wandless magic and the liar's court. "I want the people I love to be safe," he thought. "That's it. Everything else is just method." The hat was quiet for a moment. "Yes," it said, "that's the most Gryffindor thing I've heard in a decade. Gryffindor." The Gryffindor table made a sound like a small explosion. Harry walked back, sat down next to Ron, who was grinning with the fullness of a person who has just gotten excellent news, and looked across the hall to where Hermione was watching him with an expression that said she wanted a full debrief later and expected him to remember everything. He held up 5 fingers. "Their private signal established when they were 7, I'll tell you later. 5 things." She nodded and turned back to the Hufflepuff table. Next morning announced itself through the castle's stained glass with the particular gold and amber light of early September, and Harry sat at the Gryffindor table eating eggs and reading his timetable with the specific divided attention of someone who's already mapped the day in 3 directions. The timetable was interesting, not because the subjects were new. He'd been studying most of them for years, formally or informally under Rowena's curriculum or Salazar's, but because of the formality of it. Class, professor, assessment. It was the difference between knowing how to swim and swimming in a race. Same skill, different stakes, different information about where you actually stood. Ron appeared and dropped into the seat next to him with the boneless ease of someone who'd been sitting at this table for 5 older siblings worth of years and had strong feelings about where the good dishes were. He immediately began loading his plate with the focused intention of a person who considers this a separate skill from eating and is very good at both. "Defense against the dark arts," Ron said, looking over Harry's shoulder at the timetable. "Do you know who the new teacher is?" "Only Mum said she'd heard it was someone Dumbledore found in Romania, but Dad said he'd heard someone else entirely and they went back and forth about it all summer." "Quirinus Quirrell," Harry said. "He taught Muggle studies before, spent a year abroad. He came back in July. I saw him at dinner a few times." He paused. "He's different than he was before." "Different how?" Harry considered the question. He was trying to be accurate, which meant resisting the simple answer. "He smells like something wrong, something dead and old and wrong, and finding a more supportable one. He flinches. He didn't flinch before. He spent a year in the field and he came back flinching at loud noises, and he wears a turban now that he didn't before, and when he talks about the dark arts," Harry stopped again, "he talks about it like a man who's looking at something directly while pretending to look at something else." Ron stared at him. "How do you even?" "Salazar Slytherin taught me to read people." "Right," Ron said slowly. "Right, because you were raised by, yeah, okay. Is it going to be weird if I just accept that your life is completely extraordinary and move on, or do I need to keep being surprised?" "Moving on is probably more efficient," Harry said. "Moving on then," Ron said, and ate an enormous amount of sausage. Hermione materialized at the table. She moved quickly and quietly when she was focused, appearing at Harry's elbow like a logical conclusion, and dropped into the seat across from them with her own timetable and 2 books she'd checked out of the library before breakfast, one of which was clearly additional reading, and one of which was almost certainly already finished. "The Hufflepuff common room is underground," she reported, "which I expected because Helga mentioned it, but it's warmer than I expected. Round doors, it's like being inside something that wants you there." She said this with the particular precision of someone describing a feeling while trying to keep it at arm's length so she can examine it properly. "Hannah Abbott wants to be friends. She's going to be very good at herbology." "How do you know?" Ron asked. She was talking to the plant in the corner of the common room when she thought no one was listening. It was a good conversation, she had the right instincts about it. Ron looked at Harry. Harry shrugged. This was, in his experience, completely standard Hermione. Ron Weasley, Hermione said, having apparently decided she'd allocated sufficient time to reporting. I've read about your family. Your father published 3 papers on Muggle artifacts. The one on batteries was interesting, but the methodology in Section 4 was, please don't tell my dad you read his papers, Ron said. He'll never stop talking about it, I'm begging you. Hermione paused, reconsidered. All right, but the methodology was genuinely, Hermione, Harry said. Fine. Their first week as official Hogwarts students moved at a pace that Harry found simultaneously familiar and novel. The subjects themselves held few mysteries. Charms was something he'd been doing wandlessly for 4 years before he was given a wand of his own, a holly and phoenix feather combination that Ollivander had pressed into his hands in July with an expression that fell somewhere between professional composure and awe. Transfiguration was the subject McGonagall had spent the most time on in his early education, and he was considerably ahead of the class. Potions was Hermione's absolute domain, and she moved through it with the focused pleasure of someone doing something they are constitutionally designed for. Defense against the dark arts was different, not because Quirrell was bad at teaching it, he wasn't technically. He was organized, thorough, and knew the theoretical material well, but Harry sat in that classroom and felt, through every lesson, the same thing he'd noticed at dinner in July, the quality of attention from a man looking at something oblique. The way Quirrell talked about Voldemort, always he who must not be named, with a tremor in his voice and a sideways tilt of his head that was supposed to read as fear but read to Harry as something slightly different, closer to performance, closer to a man very carefully maintaining a reaction rather than having one. He brought it up to Rowena on Thursday evening. She was in the portrait frame in his room. She moved through the castle's network of paintings freely, and Harry had long since stopped finding the sudden appearances startling with a book of her own which she held at the angle of someone who is technically reading and actually thinking. I know about Quirrell, she said before he'd finished his second sentence. What do you know? Enough to be watching carefully. She turned a page of her book without reading it. Salazar has concerns also. We are discussing them. What kind of concerns? She looked at him over the book. This was the look she gave when she was deciding how much to tell him, which was a fairly rare occurrence. Her default was to tell him things so he knew whatever it was something she was genuinely uncertain about. There is a presence in the school that doesn't belong here, she said finally. Small, diminished, but real. We've been feeling it since term began, and it's concentrated, not spread through the building the way an old haunting would be. It's in one place. Quirrell, Harry said. Rowena looked at him for a moment, then she closed her book. Do not act on this alone, Harry. I wasn't planning to act alone. You were planning to act, don't pretend otherwise. I taught you to read faces, which means I can read yours. He smiled at that. It was one of the things he genuinely loved about her. She held him to the same standard she held everyone, which was the highest standard she knew, and she never pretended otherwise. I'll tell you what I'm thinking before I do anything. And Hermione, always Hermione. Good, she picked her book back up. Now tell me about your charms lesson. Flitwick's method for the Wingardium Leviosa charm has been mediocre for 30 years, and I want to know if it's gotten worse, he told her. They talked for 2 hours. Outside, the lake reflected the early September stars, and the castle moved around them with its particular warm, inhabited attention, full of sleeping students and their own peculiar history, and Harry sat in his chair by the fire in his room and felt, as he always did in the building that had always been his home, completely and entirely at ease. The thing about being the children who had grown up in Hogwarts was that they knew the castle in ways that catalogues and guidebooks and even long-term residents didn't. They knew which staircases changed their destinations on Fridays. They knew about the room on the 8th floor that appeared on request and seemed to read what you wanted from you rather than needing to be told. They knew the lake's moods, the way it went glassy before rain, the way the giant squid surfaced for sunlight like a dog angling for warmth. They knew the portrait's gossip networks, which were extensive and surprisingly accurate. They knew Peeve's schedule, which was irregular but had patterns if you watched long enough. What they hadn't known, what the castle hadn't shown them in all their years of exploring, was the 3rd-floor corridor. It opened up in September, cordoned with a warning from Dumbledore that it was forbidden for reasons that would cost students their lives to investigate, and this warning had the immediate and predictable effect on Harry and Hermione of making the 3rd-floor corridor extremely interesting. He's hiding something there, Hermione said. They were in the library, their preferred thinking location, specifically the corner table near the window that Madame Pince had long since accepted was theirs on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. The warning is too specific. Will cost you your life isn't standard Dumbledore. He's precise about language. He meant it precisely. Whatever it is, it's dangerous, Harry agreed. But the danger is contained, otherwise he'd have sealed the whole floor. He's letting it be dangerous on purpose. Hermione tapped her quill against her parchment in the quick double rhythm she did when she was working something out. It's a test, or it's a deterrent, something he's hiding that he wants to seem extremely hidden without actually making it inaccessible to someone who knew what they were looking for. Because if he made it truly inaccessible, someone might notice the thing he's protecting isn't there. Exactly, it's misdirection. She paused. Rowena would say it's bad misdirection. Rowena did say it's bad misdirection. She said Dumbledore has always valued theatre over engineering. She's right. Hermione looked at the window. The grounds were bright with afternoon sun, first years spilling across the lawn in the particular joyful chaos of children who have survived their first week of classes. What's in there? What would Dumbledore need to protect inside the school itself? Whatever it is, it came this summer. The castle didn't have it before. They both sat with that for a moment. Then Harry said, the Philosopher's Stone. Hermione went very still. Nicola's Flame. The vault at Gringotts was broken into in July. Rowena mentioned it. She said it was unusual because the vault was supposed to be impenetrable and whatever was in it was already gone when the thieves got there because Dumbledore moved it. Harry looked at her. He moved it here. Someone's looking for it, Hermione said. Someone tried Gringotts, failed, and they're going to try here next. Quirrell, they said simultaneously. There was a brief silence in which they both processed that they had arrived at the same conclusion from the same evidence at the same moment, which happened frequently and which they had mutually agreed not to comment on because it tended to alarm people who witnessed it. We should tell the Founders, Hermione said. They already know some of it. Rowena told me about the presence in the school. She didn't say Quirrell directly, but they know they're watching. Hermione bit the end of her quill, a habit Rowena had been trying to break her of for years. They're letting it play out. Because Dumbledore's plan is running, Harry said. The stone is the bait. They're watching to see who reaches for it. Which means we don't interrupt Dumbledore's plan, Hermione said, unless the plan is about to fail. Harry leaned back in his chair, eyes on the ceiling. And if Quirrell is, he lowered his voice, though the library was nearly empty, if what Rowena said is right and there's a presence in the school that shouldn't be here, then Quirrell isn't just a thief, he's a carrier. Hermione looked at him. Her face had that expression, the one she wore when she'd reached a conclusion she didn't like but couldn't disprove. Voldemort, I'd bet on it. You don't bet. I'd bet on this. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, decided, and went back to her parchment. Fine, we watch, we don't act unless the plan breaks down. She paused. And we tell Salazar not because we need permission, but because he's the only one who's fought something like this and survived it, and he might know something that matters. Harry smiled. When did you get strategic? I was always strategic, Hermione said. I just let you think it was logic. Salazar listened to them in the portrait frame in the common sitting room, the one that faced the fire, the large one with the dark green background that had always struck Harry as an interesting choice for a man who'd spent his haunting years in a Gryffindor yellow castle. He listened without interrupting, which was his usual mode. His face didn't shift much, which was also usual. But his eyes were different when they finished, sharper, the way a lens is sharper when you bring it to focus. You worked that out in a week, he said. We had more information than most people start with, Hermione said fairly. You had information, you synthesized it correctly and quickly, don't undersell the second part. He was quiet for a moment. Your assessment is correct. The presence Rowan identified, it's him. What remains of him, it's weak and it's desperate, which makes it unpredictable. Weak, desperate things frequently do the irrational thing because they have nothing to lose. He looked at Harry specifically. He will be drawn to you. Whatever is left of Voldemort is consumed by the single failure that unmade him, and that failure has your face on it. He will not be able to leave it alone. I know, Harry said. He may try to use that, the connection your scar creates between you. I know that too. Salazar studied him. Are you afraid? Harry thought about it honestly, the same way he'd thought about the sorting hat's question. No, he said. Not afraid of him, I'm cautious about him, which is different. He's dangerous, but dangerous things can be handled if you're accurate about what they are. Salazar made a sound that was the ghost of a sound that would have been an approving noise if Salazar had been in the habit of making those. Don't let the courage become arrogance, he said. Those are the same road in different lighting. I know, Harry said. You've told me that 8 times. I'll tell you 800 more if I think you need reminding. I know that too. A silence. Salazar looked at Hermione. You'll watch his back. I always watch his back, Hermione said. He watches mine. Good. Salazar glanced at the fire. Quirrell will move before the end of the year. Whatever Dumbledore's plan is, and Dumbledore always has a plan, it will come to a head in June. Watch the stone. Watch the Cerberus on the 3rd floor. Yes, I know about the Cerberus. Hagrid's taste in pets is ancient news, and watch Quirrell's patterns. He'll become more erratic as the year goes on. Weakness makes people sloppy. He paused one more time. And tell no one else, not yet. Ron, Harry said. Salazar looked at him. I'll tell Ron eventually, Harry said, not a request. He's good at this. He thinks differently than either of us, and that's useful, and he's trustworthy. I checked. The Liar's Court, first week. Something moved across Salazar's face that was the architectural ancestor of amusement. Fine. Ron Weasley, but not yet. Not yet, Harry agreed. October came in cold and windy and full of the particular brilliant foliage that the grounds produced every year, the trees along the lake burning amber and gold and deep red, and with October came the rhythms of a real school year. Essays and exams and Quidditch tryouts and the background political noise of 4 houses sharing a building. Harry made the Gryffindor Quidditch team in October. This was not surprising to anyone, least of all him. He'd been flying since he was 6, when Godric had produced a child-sized broom from somewhere in the castle's depths with the proud energy of a man presenting an heir with a sword, but it had a specific effect on his social situation that he hadn't anticipated. Quidditch made him visible in a way that being Harry Potter, the boy who grew up in the castle, had never quite done. The other students had always known him, not well but as a presence, a familiar face in the library or the corridors, but Quidditch put him in front of all 4 houses at once, every week, doing something that was objectively extraordinary. He was in the assessment of most of the school by his 3rd match, the best seeker anyone had seen since Charlie Weasley, which Ron found personally satisfying in a complicated way. He was also, as of the Slytherin match in November, the seeker who had managed to catch the snitch while 2 Slytherin beaters attempted a coordinated bludger attack designed by their team captain Marcus Flint to take him off the broom entirely. Harry had gone into a vertical dive, let both bludgers pass within a foot of him, close enough to feel the displaced air, and come out of the dive with the snitch in his hand and the Gryffindor stand, making a sound that the castle would probably remember for years. Draco Malfoy, who was in the stands rather than on the team, he'd tried out, but something about his performance in front of the Gryffindor student with the scar had apparently thrown him off his game. Watch this with the expression of a person who is experiencing an emotion he hasn't named yet and doesn't like. He appeared at Harry's shoulder in the corridor the next morning, flanked by his 2 large associates, Crabbe and Goyle, in the configuration that Harry recognized as someone's idea of intimidation. Hermione, 2 steps behind Harry, clocked it the same moment he did. He could tell by the way she shifted slightly to his left, giving herself clearance, which was so practiced it looked like nothing at all. "Potter," Malfoy said. He had a face built for a particular kind of cold confidence, the kind that came from never having been told no, and he wore it with the ease of a person who'd had years of practice. "I heard an interesting story about how you actually live in this school, about how you were raised by ghosts." "Also true," Harry said pleasantly. "Which ghosts?" "The Founders." Something crossed Malfoy's face. "All 4 of them, including Slytherin." "Salazar's one of my favorite people," Harry said. "He's sharp, he's demanding, he doesn't tolerate nonsense, and he's honest even when it costs him something. I'd recommend him." The specific confidence on Malfoy's face flickered. He'd been building toward something. Harry could see the shape of it, the prepared speech about blood purity and proper wizarding families and what someone raised by Muggles deserved, but Harry's casual reference to Salazar Slytherin had knocked the whole architecture sideways. He regrouped. "And her." He said it the way he'd clearly been trained to say it, with a very particular quality of dismissal, looking at Hermione. Hermione looked back at him with the same equanimity she brought to particularly troublesome equations. Not hostile, not worried, just analytical. "Me," she said. "Mudblood," Malfoy said with the sharp satisfaction of someone who expects the word to do something. "Muggle-born," Hermione corrected him pleasantly in the exact tone of someone correcting a factual error. "There's a first-year distinction that might interest you. Mud implies contamination, which implies the person using the word believes in a biological hierarchy that the last 100 years of magical genetics research has thoroughly disproven. Salazar Slytherin himself told me last year that the beliefs that word came from were," she chose the word carefully, "his greatest intellectual failure, his phrase." Malfoy stared at her. "He said you could verify it with him directly if you wanted," Harry offered. "He's in the East Wing portrait, 2nd frame from the left, though I should warn you he doesn't take kindly to people repeating his worst ideas back at him as though they're wisdom. He gets a bit terse." The look on Malfoy's face was something new, something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite confusion, and was perhaps the very early architectural stage of doubt. He didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. He turned and walked away, Crabbe and Goyle following with the faithful lumber of people who have decided the smartest thing to do is match someone else's exit. Hermione watched him go. "He's going to be a problem," she said. "He's going to be a project," Harry corrected. She looked at him sideways. "There's a difference. A problem you solve, a project you work on over time." Harry started walking. Salazar didn't figure out he was wrong until he'd had 9 centuries and 2 children to help him see it. Malfoy's 12, he might be faster. Hermione walked alongside him, quiet for a moment. "You sound like Helga when you say things like that." "Is that bad?" "No," she said. "It's the opposite." Christmas at Hogwarts that year was the same as every Christmas at Hogwarts had always been for Harry, brilliant and warm and entirely his. The castle decorated itself with the particular enthusiasm of a building that had been celebrating the season for 1,000 years, and the Founders had their own traditions that they'd accumulated across their years of haunting. Godric told a story on Christmas Eve that grew longer and more embellished every year. Helga filled the sitting room with enchanted plants that smelled like cinnamon and pine. Rowena set the mathematical puzzles hidden in their Christmas crackers that got noticeably harder each year, and Salazar taught them something new every year on the day itself, a skill, a piece of magical history, something he deemed appropriate. This year he taught them both to recognize a possession. He did it the way he taught everything, practically, technically, without drama, explaining the theoretical signatures of a spirit pressing itself into a living body against that body's will, the specific discordances you could feel in the magic of a possessed person if you knew what to feel for, the way the possessing presence left traces even when it was trying to hide. Hermione recognized immediately that this was not a generic lesson. This is about Quirrell, she said. This is a skill, Salazar said. It happens to be applicable to your current situation. So yes, don't be clever about it, learn the skill. They learned the skill that night sitting by the fire while Godric's story reached its 4th hour and showed no signs of concluding. Hermione leaned over to Harry and said quietly, he taught us this because he's worried. About Quirrell, yes, but also about us. About what happens when Dumbledore's plan runs its course and we're in the middle of it. Harry thought about it. Outside the tall windows, snow was falling on the grounds and the lake was frozen at the edges and the castle was warm and lit, and somewhere in the east wing portrait frame in the quiet hours of Christmas, Salazar Slytherin was probably sitting with his own version of this, the careful, controlled worry of a man who would never call it love but was doing everything love does. He wants us ready, Harry said. He always wants us ready. She paused. But this is different. This is him being scared for us. Has he been scared before? He's always been scared, Hermione said quietly. He just uses other words for it. Outside, the snow fell, the fire burned. Godric reached a genuinely exciting part of his story and the sitting room went briefly, gloriously loud. And Harry and Hermione sat in the warmth of it, this family they'd been given, dead and brilliant and difficult and deeply, quietly theirs, and felt ready for whatever June would bring. Not because they were fearless, but because fearlessness they'd both been taught was just love with a sword in its hand. Chapter 3, Old Names, New Enemies. Halloween arrived at Hogwarts the way it always did, with a feast that made the Great Hall smell like the inside of a dream, enchanted bats threading through the floating candles, and the particular electric quality of a night that had always felt to Harry like the castle was remembering something. He knew what it was remembering. He'd known since he was old enough to understand calendars. Hermione found him on the astronomy tower at 9:30, after the feast had wound down and the students had filtered back to their dormitories in the warm, satisfied days of people who have eaten considerably more than was wise. She came up the stairs without being loud about it, sat down next to him on the stone ledge with her knees pulled up and her robes wrapped tight against the October cold, and didn't say anything for a while. That was one of the things he valued most about her. She understood the difference between silences that needed filling and silences that needed company. Below them, the ground spread out in the dark, the lake flat and black and enormous, the forbidden forest a dense shadow along the western edge, the Quidditch pitch ghostly white under the half-moon. The castle breathed around them in its slow, warm way, and somewhere down in the depths of it, Harry knew, Helga was probably in the sitting room, not waiting specifically but present in the way she always was on this night. My parents died on a Monday, Hermione said eventually. She said it the way she said difficult things, flatly, factually, with the slight forward lean of someone making sure the words go where she aimed them. It doesn't have a, she searched for the phrase, a calendar meaning. There's no date that the world has decided to observe, it's just a Monday in November that I know about and no one else marks. Is that better or worse? Harry asked. She thought about it seriously because Hermione always thought things seriously. I'm not sure, both maybe, there's a kind of privacy to it. A pause. Today is yours though, in a way everyone knows it. Yeah, he looked at the lake. It's strange, the whole wizarding world treats it like a holiday. Like it was something that happened to them, and I was 14 months old and asleep and my mum and dad, he started again. Godric told me once that the bravest thing James Potter ever did wasn't any of the things he's famous for, it was standing in a doorway without a wand buying Lily 30 more seconds. Hermione was quiet. He bought 30 seconds, Harry said, and it was enough. It was enough, she agreed. They sat there a while longer. The moon moved a hand's width across the sky. Somewhere far below, an owl called once and went quiet. We should go in, Harry said finally. Salazar wants to do a session tomorrow morning and he said early, which with Salazar means before the sun is entirely committed to rising. Hermione stood, brushing stone dust from her robes. He said early because he knows you're slower to focus in the mornings and he wants to work on that. You could not say that. I could because it's true and you know it's true. She was already heading for the stairs, but she paused at the top of them and looked back, and in the particular blue-white light of the October moon she looked older than 11 and younger than she usually felt, both at once. They loved you, Harry, James and Lily. The whole shape of tonight is proof of it. He didn't say anything, he didn't need to. She went down the stairs. He stayed a moment longer looking at the lake and then he followed her in. The troll came from the dungeons, which was the first thing wrong with Quirrell's performance. He burst into the Great Hall at dinner. Harry clocked the performance aspect immediately, the way Quirrell had timed his entrance for maximum impact, waited for the noise level to peak before staggering through the doors and announced in a voice trembling with precisely calibrated panic that there was a troll in the dungeon. Then he fainted. Or performed a feint. The landing was slightly too controlled. The Great Hall erupted into the predictable chaos, students scrambling to their feet, Dumbledore calling for calm in the carrying voice he used for emergencies, the prefects beginning to herd their houses toward the dormitories with the focused urgency of people who have trained for exactly this. Harry stayed in his seat long enough to scan the staff table. Every professor was reacting, McGonagall sharp and immediate, moving toward Dumbledore, Flitwick looking genuinely alarmed, Sprout already halfway to the doors, Quirrell lying dramatically on the flagstones. Snape was already gone. Harry filed that away and moved. He caught Hermione's eye across the hall. She was standing from the Hufflepuff table, and the look she gave him said she'd noticed the same things he had, and they angled toward each other through the press of moving students with the practiced ease of two people who'd been navigating this building together for years. Snape left before Dumbledore finished speaking, Harry said low. Quirrell's feint is fake, Hermione said. The troll is probably real, though. Oh, it's definitely real. I can smell it from here. She wrinkled her nose. They smell like something died inside something else that was already dead. It's coming from the west corridor. They moved west. We should be going to our dormitories, Hermione said in the tone she used when she was noting an official position before doing something that contradicted it. Probably, Harry agreed. Rowena would want us to assess the situation before engaging. Salazar would say don't waste time on preliminaries. Godric would already be running. Helga would make sure everyone else was safe first and then deal with it herself. Harry glanced at her. We're all four of them. Pick your approach. All four, Hermione decided. We make sure the corridors are clear first, then we deal with it. The corridors were clear. Most students were already moving upstairs, but as they swung around the corner into the west wing, they nearly ran into a problem. Lavender Brown and Parvati Patil, two Gryffindor first years who'd somehow gotten turned around in the chaos, were pressed against the wall outside the girls' bathroom looking at the closed door with the specific expression of people who desperately want to be somewhere else and cannot move. She's in there, Lavender said when she saw Granger, the other one, Granger from our dormitory. She's been in there crying all afternoon. She doesn't know about the Harry was already moving to the bathroom door. He pushed it open. The smell hit first, the terrible dead weight of troll, rancid and enormous and close. Then he saw it, 12 feet of grey-green muscle and malice, dragging a club the size of a tree trunk through the narrow bathroom with the slow, unintelligent fury of something that doesn't understand that it's in a confined space. Sinks were shattering, stalls were coming apart, and in the corner, backed against the far wall with her hands over her mouth and her eyes very large, was a girl with bushy brown hair he didn't recognize. She was not screaming. He noted that she was terrified, but she was watching the troll, tracking its movements, not frozen so much as calculating. That was interesting. Hey, he shouted at the troll. The troll turned. Harry had fought, had sparred, had drilled, had trained with Godric and Salazar and McGonagall across 5 years of deliberate, structured magical combat preparation. But he had never fought something that was entirely muscle and no mind, and the first thing he learned about trolls in the next 4 seconds was that the absence of mind made them unpredictable in a specific way. They didn't react the way thinking things react. They just moved toward noise. So he stepped to the right and the club went through the space where he'd been and stone cracked like a gunshot where it landed. Hermione, he said. She was already in the room, wand up. Wingardium Leviosa. The club tore itself out of the troll's hand and shot to the ceiling. The troll made a sound like a building falling down and looked up at its club with the specific bafflement of a creature that has never lost something before. Harry pointed his wand at the troll's eyes. Lumos Maxima. The flash was white and total. The troll lurched backward, blinded, crashing into the row of sinks on the far wall and taking most of them with it. The girl in the corner had pressed herself as far into the angle of the walls as she could physically go, arms over her head, and Harry moved to her while the troll was still reeling. "Can you move?" he asked her. She looked up. Her eyes were brown and very sharp, and despite everything, the chaos, the crashing, the 12-foot disoriented monster 4 feet away, she looked at him with something that was almost assessment. "Yes," she said. "I was going to use Alohomora on the window lock if I could get to the window. The window's 12 feet up. I know, I was working on that part." He almost smiled. "Come on." He got her to the door. Hermione covered from the left, sending a second Wingardium Leviosa to knock the troll's own club into its face, which gave them 10 feet of clearance and the troll a concussion it richly deserved. They got through the door. Lavender and Parvati, who had stayed in the corridor, Harry made a note to think well of them for that, immediately moved to flank the rescued girl. The troll came through the door behind them. In the corridor it was worse, more room, more momentum, the club back in its hand from some instinct Harry hadn't anticipated. It swung and Harry ducked under it and came up already moving, already calculating, 12 feet slow to turn, pain response in the face registered as a threat, eyes compromised from the lumos, so the primary sensory input right now was sound, he said. It's tracking us by sound. Hermione understood immediately. She grabbed the sleeve of the brown-haired girl. "Don't move, don't speak, stay against the wall," and the girl nodded and went still as stone. Harry went the other direction and made noise. He moved down the corridor fast and loud, feet on the stone, and the troll pivoted toward him with the slow, terrible momentum of something enormous beginning to move. It came down the corridor. Harry backed up, keeping the distance constant, keeping the noise consistent, leading it away from the 4 girls pressed motionless against the wall. Then he went up, not with a broom. Just up, a simple ascendio directed at himself, the way he'd learned wandless at 7 and refined in the years since, and he landed on top of the troll's head in the specific, absurd, absolute confidence of someone who has been training for this since before most people would consider it appropriate, shoved his wand into the troll's nose and said stupefy with all the intent he had. The troll went down like a building. The corridor shook, dust fell from the ceiling. Harry stepped off the unconscious troll and landed on the stones and turned around. Professor McGonagall was standing at the end of the corridor. Professor Snape was beside her. Professor Quirrell was behind them both, expression composed into the appropriate mixture of relief and residual alarm. McGonagall looked at Harry, at Hermione, at the unconscious troll, at the 4 first-year girls. At the condition of the girls' bathroom, which could be heard from the corridor because most of the interior walls were now structural memories. "Explain," she said. "The troll came from the west corridor," Harry said. "We cleared the area and engaged it when it cornered." He glanced at the brown-haired girl. "Susan Bones," she supplied with the crispness of someone who has decided the appropriate response to being nearly killed is accurate record-keeping. "Susan Bones in the bathroom. Hermione's Wingardium disarmed it, and I used Lumos Maxima for the eyes and Stupefy to bring it down." McGonagall continued to look at him with the expression she had perfected over 10 years of knowing him, the one that meant you should have been somewhere safe and you handled it well simultaneously, and she had strong feelings about both and wasn't going to award them equal weight. 5 points from Gryffindor, she said, for being where you had no business being. Minerva, Quirrell started, something shifting in his voice. And 20 points to Gryffindor, she continued without looking at Quirrell, for exceptional defensive work. 20 points to Hufflepuff as well, Miss Granger. She looked at Susan Bones, and 5 points to Hufflepuff for having the presence of mind to remain still when told. Her gaze moved to Lavender and Parvati. Gryffindor, you stayed in the corridor instead of running, 5 points each. She looked at the troll. I'll need Hagrid, she said, mostly to herself. Snape had been watching the whole exchange with an expression that Harry, who had been reading Snape's expressions since he was old enough to notice they were always carefully controlled versions of stronger things, found interesting. He wasn't looking at Harry with dislike, which was his default mode in Harry's experience. He was looking at him with something more complicated, something closer to a reassessment. Quirrell behind them both was looking at Harry too, and the look on Quirrell's face was something Harry had never seen on a teacher's face before, and it took him a moment to identify because it was so unexpected. It was fear. Susan Bones found Harry in the library the next morning. She came to the table with the directness of a person who has decided something and is acting on it, sat down across from him without asking whether she was welcome and said, "You stepped onto its head." "It worked," Harry said. "It was also ridiculous. Those aren't mutually exclusive." He looked at her. She had the kind of face that was honest in the architectural sense, not expressive exactly, but structurally transparent, built in a way that made her feelings legible if you paid attention. Right now she was processing something. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said it the way people say it when it's both true and slightly more complicated than true. "My aunt is Amelia Bones. She's head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. I've been told since I was very small how to behave in an emergency, which is don't panic, gather information and identify your resources." A pause. "I did not expect my resources to land on the troll's head. To be fair, I didn't plan that part." "What did you plan?" "I planned to get its attention and lead it away. The head was improvised." She looked at him for a moment. "You're not what I expected," she said. "You're what everyone talks about, the boy who grew up here, the founders, the scar, all of it, but it's all very mythological. And then you were just there making noise so it would follow you instead of us, and it was very ordinary." "It didn't feel ordinary to me," Harry said honestly. "No," she said, "but the bravest things usually don't feel heroic from the inside. My aunt says that." She stood. "Thank you, I'm going to be a good person to know. My aunt knows everyone in the ministry and I have a very good memory." She said it without arrogance, the way Hermione said similar things, as a factual self-assessment, not a boast. "I believe you," Harry said. "Good." She left. Hermione appeared from behind the bookshelf she'd been shelving things at. She did her own shelving, which Madame Pince had stopped objecting to after Hermione reorganized the magical theory section in a way that was objectively superior, and dropped into the seat Susan had vacated. "She's going to be useful," Hermione said. "I know." And she was remarkably composed for someone who nearly got killed by a troll last night. "So were you, from what I heard." He raised an eyebrow. "Lavender said you were out there keeping everyone still while I was doing the loud part." Hermione adjusted the books she was carrying with the slight self-conscious precision she did when she was accepting a compliment and wasn't sure how. "Someone had to be quiet while you were being loud," she said. "It's basic strategy. It's what Salazar would call elegant." Salazar would never use the word elegant. He'd use efficient and mean elegant. She considered this. "True," she said. And quieter, "Quirrell looked frightened of you last night." "I know, I've been thinking about it. Not frightened the way a person is frightened of someone dangerous," she said carefully. "Frightened the way a person is frightened of a thing they didn't expect to encounter, like we weren't in the plan, whatever plan Quirrell or whoever's behind Quirrell had for this year. 2 first-year students who can take down a mountain troll by themselves weren't in it." Harry leaned back. "Good," he said. "Good. Dumbledore's plan involves one boy, the chosen one, the famous Scar. Whatever Voldemort has planned involves the same variables, a famous prophecy, a child who defeated him through love, all the drama of destiny." He looked at her steadily. "He didn't plan for 2 of us. He didn't plan for what we actually are. The Scar is in the plan. Salazar Slytherin teaching me legilimency since I was 7 is not in the plan." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Rowena says asymmetric information is the greatest force multiplier in any conflict. When did she say that? Last Tuesday we were discussing Muggle military history. Of course you were, the point stands. Hermione opened one of her books. We have information Voldemort doesn't have. We are capabilities Voldemort hasn't accounted for. That's our advantage and we should protect it. Meaning when Quirrell finally moves, when Dumbledore's plan reaches its endgame, we should not walk into it looking like heroes. She looked at him over the book. We should walk into it looking like what we are, which is people who were ready before anyone told us to be. November introduced 3 new dynamics to the year. Quidditch matches, which Harry won and which made the school progressively noisier on his behalf in a way he found more amusing than gratifying. The steady mounting tension between Gryffindor and Slytherin that had apparently been a fixture of the school since the founders themselves had first disagreed about it in a spectacularly public way circa 990 AD, and Draco Malfoy. Malfoy had not approached either of them again after the corridor encounter in September, but he hadn't gone away. He occupied the same school, appeared in the same classes, existed at the Slytherin table at a diagonal angle from where Harry could usually see him during meals. He watched. Harry had noticed it early and watched back, and what he saw in Malfoy's watching was not hostility exactly. It was something more unsettled. The boy had grown up with a very specific map of the world. Harry knew this without being told, recognized the architecture of it from 100 smaller observations, and that map had a specific place for people like Hermione, below the line. And there was Slytherin himself in the portrait frame repudiating that map, not through argument or persuasion or the kind of frontal challenge that Malfoy could push back against. Just through the existence of how he talked about Hermione, about Harry, about the last several years of reconsidering everything he'd built. The map was wrong, and Malfoy was trying to figure out if that was possible. Harry left him to it. He made no attempt to press the advantage, no attempt to befriend or confront, just kept existing in Malfoy's peripheral vision as proof that the world was more complicated than anyone had told him, and let time do the work that time was better suited for. Ron, who had no patience whatsoever for this approach, said at least 3 times that Harry should just tell Malfoy he was a prat and be done with it, which Harry appreciated for its sincerity if not its strategy. Ron had been told in November about Quirrell, about the stone, about the presence in the school. He had taken it the way he took most things Harry told him that were extraordinary, with a short silence, a slight widening of the eyes, and then the focused pragmatic pivot of someone who processes shock quickly and prefers to skip immediately to the useful part. Right, he'd said. So Voldemort's in the building, possessing the defense teacher, trying to nick the stone, and Dumbledore's using the stone as bait. And you two have known since September. Since September, Harry confirmed. Why didn't you tell me? We needed to know you first. Ron processed that. Fair, he said, which Harry thought said more about Ron's character than any number of more elaborate responses would have. Right, what do you need from me? You know the castle, Hermione said. You've been coming here since you were a child with your brothers, since I was 6, yeah. And you know things about how the school works from the student side that we don't because we've always been adjacent to it rather than in it. What rumors are people talking about? What's the Student Intelligence Network saying? Ron blinked at her. The Student Intelligence Network, that's yeah, all right, that's what it is, let me think, he thought. There's a lot of talk about Snape. People think Snape's trying to get the, well, people don't know about the stone specifically, but everyone thinks Snape wants whatever's being guarded, and they think he's going to jinx Harry during a Quidditch match to distract people. Snape isn't going to jinx me during a Quidditch match, Harry said. He's irritating, but he's not working for Voldemort. How do you know? Because Dumbledore trusts him, and whatever else I think about Dumbledore's methods, his judgment about loyalty is it's the thing he's best at. Harry paused. Also, Salazar told me he and Snape have talked. Apparently Snape's been watching Quirrell for months. Because of the, Ron gestured vaguely at his own head. He can feel it too, the presence. Harry had told Ron about the snake language in the same conversation, and Ron had said brilliant with the same uncomplicated sincerity he applied to everything, which was one of the reasons Harry had decided Ron was worth telling. Most people in the building can't sense it, but people with a strong enough magical signature and the right kind of attunement, like you and Hermione, Ron said, and Snape, and the Founders, obviously. Obviously, Ron said in the tone of someone who was trying very hard to normalize his life. Right, so Quirrell's the one to watch. What do we do? Nothing yet, Hermione said. We watch Quirrell's patterns and we watch when he tries to access the corridor. When he makes his move, we'll know. And then we handle it, Harry said simply. Ron looked at him for a moment. You're very calm about this. I've known about it since I was old enough to understand what it was, Harry said. Salazar made sure of that. Hard to be frightened of something you've been preparing for since you were 7. I was not told by any ancient dead wizard about the Dark Lord who tried to kill me, Ron said. I'm handling this remarkably well, I think. You're handling it perfectly, Hermione said with the particular sincerity she reserved for things she actually meant and wasn't going to soften. Ron went slightly pink and immediately redirected. Right, good. I'll find out what I can from the castle side. Percy, my brother, he's a prefect, he patrols near the 3rd floor on Wednesdays. I'll get his schedule. The Quidditch match in December was against Hufflepuff, and Harry caught the snitch in 14 minutes. which was fast enough that half the Hufflepuff team was still looking for it when he landed. Hermione, who had developed strong and somewhat contradictory feelings about Quidditch, she found the rules elegant and the execution reckless, was in the stands and clapped in the precise, evaluative way of someone who is complimenting competence rather than celebrating a house victory. Susan Bones, sitting next to her in the Hufflepuff section, clapped normally and looked only slightly pained about the outcome. They developed a friendship, those two, with the complementary efficiency of people who discover they are useful to each other in specific ways. Hermione was more conceptually ambitious, Susan more practically grounded. Hermione built theories from evidence, Susan built networks from people. They met in the overlap, which was where most interesting things happened. Susan had, in the quiet, industrious way of someone who'd been networking since childhood, mapped out most of the staff relationships in the school by December. She reported these findings to Hermione, who shared the relevant ones with Harry, who discussed them with Salazar, who said, "The Bones girl has better intelligence-gathering instincts than 3/4 of the strategists I knew in life," and clearly meant it as the highest compliment available. December also brought the event that none of them had expected. It happened in Potions, Snape's class, which Harry approached with the same careful attention he'd learned to bring to people who are performing an attitude rather than having one. He'd understood Snape's particular mode of dislike since second week. It was pointed, surgical, and specifically calibrated to Harry in a way that had nothing to do with Harry's actual behavior and everything to do with something Snape saw when he looked at Harry's face. Harry looked like James, he knew this. Helga had shown him photographs. He'd made a decision early to not take Snape's hostility personally, which was not the same as accepting it. He simply noticed it, catalogued its patterns, and worked around it with the specific, elegant efficiency of someone who finds direct confrontation less interesting than understanding why the confrontation exists in the first place. In December's Potions, Snape moved to the front of the room to demonstrate a correction on Neville Longbottom's potion. Neville had the magical instincts of someone who should be extraordinary but whose anxiety acted as constant interference, and on his way back up the aisle he stopped at Harry's desk. Harry's potion was perfect. He knew it was perfect. He'd memorized the potion's curriculum in third year before he was formally enrolled as a student. Snape looked at it for a long moment. "Where did you learn the cold addition method for the boomslang skin?" he asked, not with his usual acid, flatly, as though asking a genuine question was something he was doing against his better judgment. "Rowena Ravenclaw's personal notes on advanced potions applications," Harry said. "She collected annotated editions from the 14th and 15th centuries. Most of the techniques aren't in the standard curriculum." A silence. "Ravenclaw kept potions notes," Snape said. "She kept notes on everything. She said potions was essentially applied chemistry and the wizarding world's approach to it was limited by not talking to Muggle scientists more." He paused. "I think you'd find the second volume interesting. It's in the restricted section. I know where the restricted section is, Potter." "Of course." Harry went back to his potion. Another silence, longer this time. Then Snape moved on and nothing was said and the lesson continued. But at the end, as students were filing out, Snape said to the room in general, looking at no one specifically, "The cold addition method adds 17 minutes to the preparation time but increases potency by 30%. Those interested in advanced techniques should investigate Ravenclaw's collected notes independently." It was, Harry reflected, the most indirect compliment he was ever likely to receive from Severus Snape, and it was worth quite a lot in its own way. Mentioned it to Salazar that evening. Salazar looked at him with the faint ghost of an expression that Harry had learned to read as satisfaction. "Snape," he said, "was one of the most naturally talented potions minds I encountered in the last 3 centuries. Your mother was too, incidentally. He spent 30 years being a mediocre teacher because mediocrity in a classroom is safer than excellence when you're living a double life." A pause. He's starting to remember what he actually is. "Is that good?" "It's complicated," Salazar said, which was his version of yes. January came with snow and owl anxiety in the upper years and a specific new development in the castle's third-floor corridor that Ron discovered by accident on a Wednesday night when he was returning from Percy's patrol route with a sketched map. "The door," he said, dropping into the chair across from Harry in the Gryffindor common room, slightly out of breath. "The one to the forbidden corridor. It was open. Just a crack I could hear." He paused, breathing, really large breathing, and then something else, like music almost. "A harp," Harry said. "There's a harp set to play automatically near the Cerberus. It keeps it asleep." "The Cerberus," Ron repeated. 3 heads, and the harp was playing. "Someone set it up as a security measure. If the harp stops playing, the dog wakes up," Ron said. "And if someone wanted to get past the dog, they'd need the harp to keep playing, which means they'd need to either continue the music themselves or," he looked at Harry, "or bring something else the dog finds soothing. Or they just need the dog distracted long enough," Hermione said. She'd come down from the girls' dormitory and dropped into the third chair with the book she was reading, adding herself to the conversation without ceremony. "How long does it take to get past a sleeping Cerberus?" 30 seconds probably, Harry said, "if you're moving fast. Then 30 seconds of distraction is all that's needed. Music, a noise from another direction, anything." She looked at Harry. "This is getting close." I know, we should tell Rowena. I'll tell all of them tonight. Ron looked at him. All four of the yeah right okay, just normal Tuesday then. It's Wednesday, Hermione said. Completely normal Wednesday. Ron leaned back in his chair. What happens after the Cerberus? What's being used beyond that? Harry and Hermione exchanged a look. We don't know exactly, Harry said. Rowena says Dumbledore had 4 or 5 different layers, different protections, different enchantments. She thinks he asked different professors to contribute, so each layer is specific to one person's magic, Ron said immediately, which means each one has the weakness of whoever built it. If you know the professors, you know the weaknesses, Hermione said, and she was looking at Ron with the expression she wore when someone had surprised her. Yes, that's exactly right. Ron blinked. I'm occasionally useful. You're frequently useful, she said. You just don't lead with it. He went pink again. Harry, watching this with the measured attention of someone who had very good instincts about people, filed it away for future reference. February burned through cold and Valentines that Godric found tremendously amusing, and Salazar declared, a commercial enterprise masquerading as sentiment, and March brought a specific shift in the castle's atmosphere that Harry had been watching for. Quirrell was getting worse. The composure was slipping. Not dramatically, Quirrell was too controlled for dramatic slippage, but in the small ways that Harry had been trained since childhood to observe. The flinching was different now, less performance, more genuine reflex. He talked about the dark arts in class with a specific tension around his eyes that hadn't been there in September. He was sleeping badly, Harry could tell by the quality of his attention in morning lessons, the way the surface composure took slightly longer to construct each day. Whatever presence was sharing, his body was pushing harder. Harry brought this to the Founders on a Tuesday evening in March. All 4 of them gathered in the portrait frames in the common sitting room in the configuration they took when something required collective discussion, Godric standing because he always stood, Helga sitting in the painted herb garden, Rowena at her desk, Salazar in the dark frame with his arms crossed. The timeline is moving up, Harry said. He'll move before June. April, Rowena said. Perhaps late March. How confident? Harry asked, highly. What do we do? We know the layers, Hermione said. She had her notebook, which was dense with organized observations. We've worked out most of them based on what we know about each professor's strongest magic. McGonagall would use transfiguration, something living probably because her strength is in living transformations. Sprout would use herbology, some plant-based obstacle. Flitwick's a dueling champion, Godric said. He'd use something combat-related. Flying keys maybe, he'd find the chase sporting. The mirror, Salazar said. Everyone looked at him. Dumbledore's final layer will be a mirror, he said. Erest, he built it, I know his thinking. It shows you the deepest desire of your heart and its final application. He stopped for a moment, working through something. He's modified it, somehow. So that only someone who wants the stone not to use it but to find it can actually retrieve it from the mirror's interior. That's elegant, Rowena said, and she didn't say that easily. It's Dumbledore, Salazar said, which was neither compliment nor criticism and somehow both. If Quirrell reaches the mirror, Hermione said, and desires the stone to give to Voldemort, he won't be able to take it, Harry said. Because he wants to use it, the mirror won't give it to him. But he'll know what the mirror shows him, she said. He'll see himself with the stone in hand, and if there's someone else there who can figure out the correct mode of desire, someone who wants to find it without wanting to keep it, Harry said. He looked at Salazar. He'll want me there. Voldemort will want me in front of the mirror because through Quirrell he can direct me, he thinks, and if I'm the one who reaches into the mirror for the stone, he'll have a host whose desire is pure enough to retrieve it. He doesn't know, Salazar said, what you actually are. No, Harry agreed. He knows the prophecy version of me, the orphan version, the boy who survived by accident and grew up somewhere unknown. His voice was very level. He doesn't know I've been thinking about this conversation for 4 years. The sitting room was quiet for a moment. Outside, the March wind was doing something architectural to the castle's northern battlements, and the fire crackled, and Helga, who had not spoken yet during this discussion, said, Harry. He looked at her. She had the specific expression she wore when she was going to say something that needed to be heard rather than just processed. When you go down there, and you will go down there, I know you well enough to know that I need you to remember something. Not the training, not the plan, not the calculation, something simpler. She looked at him with the warmth of someone who had sat with him through every bad night of his childhood and would sit with him through many more if given the chance. He cannot understand what you're willing to lose for the people you love. He has never been able to understand it. It's his blind spot. Use it. Harry held her gaze. I know, he said softly. I know you know, she said. I'm telling you anyway because that's what mothers do. No one said anything for a moment. Salazar made a sound that was not a clearing of the throat because Salazar Slytherin did not have physical responses to emotion, thank you very much, but was structurally adjacent to one. Right, Godric said loudly and with the energy of someone redirecting the room before he did something embarrassing like feel something. Tactical plan, let's hear it, Harry told them. They argued about parts of it, which was the most useful thing they could do. Rowena identified 3 potential problems in the middle section. Salazar restructured the approach to the mirror. Godric contributed nothing analytically useful but was so enthusiastic about the overall framework that the room's energy improved measurably. Helga listened and smiled and didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Quirrell moved on a Tuesday in April. Harry knew before Hermione did. The scar burned, sudden and sharp in the middle of breakfast, the way it occasionally did when he was near Quirrell, but never this intensely, never with this specific quality of desperation behind it. He put his fork down, looked across the hall to where Quirrell's chair at the staff table was empty. He looked at the door. Looked back at Ron, who had noticed and was already sitting up straighter with the particular expression of someone who is checking that they have their wand. Now, Harry said quietly. He stood. Hermione. She appeared from the Hufflepuff table 3 seconds later. She had her bag. Of course she had her bag. Quirrell, she said, just left 5 minutes ago maybe. We need to go. I know. Ron, she said. Ron stood up without being asked twice. They went out the side door before anyone at the staff table had registered that students were leaving breakfast in an unauthorized direction, moved through the corridors at a pace that was very nearly running, and reached the 3rd floor to find the door to the forbidden corridor already open. The music from the harp was slowing, winding down. They went through. The Cerberus was already half awake, its 3 heads lifting, eyes glassy with the remnant of sleep, a low sound building in its chest that was the architectural precursor to something very loud. Harry walked to the center of the room, looked at all 3 heads and said something in a long, slow, descending tone that wasn't English and wasn't Parseltongue but was something older, something that Salazar had spent 6 months teaching him when he was 9, because the language of living things precedes the language of humans and it remains the most direct path to the instinct layer. All 3 heads lowered. The sound stopped. The Cerberus settled. Hermione found the trapdoor. They went down. What followed was, in Harry's private accounting of his own life, the most interesting 40 minutes he'd ever spent, and that was including the time Godric had accidentally turned the entire 4th floor into a swamp for a week in 1002 and made everyone navigate it by boat. They moved through Sprout's Devil's Snare with Hermione's Lumos Solemn burning it back in great warm sweeps. They moved through Flitwick's flying keys, hundreds of them, ancient and winged and chaotic, and Harry flew on a broom that was one of 6 stored in the room for this purpose, and caught the correct key in under a minute, because the correct key was the one that was damaged, that moved differently from the others, that had something wrong with one wing and compensated with a particular stuttering beat. He found it by listening. Dumbledore's chess set was the one that stopped them, not Harry and Hermione. Ron. He looked at the board for 60 seconds, then turned to them with an expression that was absolutely calm and absolutely terrifying in its calmness and said, "This is a killing board. Whoever plays this, some of the pieces get taken, physically taken. You need to win in 11 moves, which means losing a knight and a bishop." He looked at the white knight piece, which was already turning to look at him. "I'll be the knight." Ron, Hermione started. 11 moves, he said. "I'll take the hit on move 7. It's the only route through. You need to go on without me." He looked at Harry. "You know what you're doing when you get there." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Harry said. "Then go." He sat down on the white knight's horse, and the piece moved under him with the smooth inevitability of chess logic, and they left him there, and neither Harry nor Hermione looked back, because Ron had said go, and looking back would have been an insult. The potions challenge was elegant, a logic puzzle rather than magic, which meant most wizards who reached it were undone by the assumption that magic was always the answer. 7 bottles, 1 forward, 1 back. Hermione solved it in 90 seconds, which Harry noted was probably the fastest it had been solved in the history of the challenge, given that it was designed to be genuinely difficult. She handed him the correct bottle, and they looked at each other in the purple torch passage, and she said, "He's in there. I know, he'll want to use you. He can try." "Harry," she grabbed his sleeve, not to stop him, just to anchor the moment. "Come back." He looked at her. His best friend, who had turned up at Hogwarts at 3 years old with an upside-down book, and had been the most extraordinary person in any room they'd ever been in together, which was saying something given the rooms they'd been in. "Obviously," he said. She let go. He went through the door. The mirror room was dark and cold, and the mirror stood at its center, throwing back a reversed image of a space that wasn't quite this one. Quirrell stood before it with his back to Harry, and the quality of his stillness was wrong, not a person being still, but a person being held still, the stillness of a puppet whose strings are being gripped. Harry walked in and the door closed behind him. "I wondered," Quirrell said, turning, "whether you'd come." The voice wasn't entirely Quirrell's. There was something underneath it, thin and cold and old in the way that things preserved past their natural span are always slightly wrong. "Hello," Harry said. He looked at Quirrell with the liar's caught attention Salazar had spent years sharpening in him, and he read what was there in 3 seconds. Quirrell was exhausted, frightened, and half gone. The person who had traveled to Albania and come back flinching was still in there somewhere, but only barely, like a candle under heavy glass. The voice that was underneath said, "Come to the mirror." "I'd rather not," Harry said pleasantly. A pause. The mirror stood between them, and in its surface Harry could see himself, not clearly, not the way the mirror usually worked, because Dumbledore had modified it, and the modification was doing something complicated to what it showed, but he could see enough to know that whatever Voldemort expected to happen when Harry faced the mirror was not going to happen the way Voldemort expected. Because Harry didn't want the stone, not to keep it, not for himself. He wanted it to be safe. He wanted it to be somewhere that this diminished, desperate, terrible remnant of a person couldn't reach it. The mirror showed him that. and in showing him that it did exactly what Dumbledore had designed it to do, he felt the stone in his pocket. Quirrell felt it too. The puppet strings pulled tight and Quirrell stepped forward and the voice said, "Give it to me," with a kind of hunger that was purely animal, and Harry said, "No." What followed was brief and extremely one-sided. Not because Quirrell was weak. The magic coming through him was old and powerful and shot through with the specific desperate fury of a thing that has spent 10 years looking for a body and is not going to be patient about it. But Harry had been trained by Godric Gryffindor, who believed that attack was the superior form of defense, by Rowena Ravenclaw, who believed that precision was more powerful than force, by Helga Hufflepuff, who had taught him that the most underestimated power in any confrontation is the person who has nothing to lose because they have already decided what they're protecting, by Salazar Slytherin, who had taught him that the most devastating thing you can do to an enemy is understand them better than they understand themselves. He hit Quirrell with a shield charm and a stupefy at the same time, from opposite angles because he'd been practicing split-casting wandlessly since he was 9, and the combination was enough to knock Quirrell sideways. The contact when Quirrell grabbed his wrist, desperate, physical, scrabbling, did something that Harry didn't fully understand and didn't have time to examine. His skin burned where Quirrell touched it and Quirrell screamed. His mother's love, Salazar's voice said in his memory, very calm from a conversation they'd had 2 years ago. The sacrifice Lily made created a protection. Physical contact with what's left of Voldemort, it will burn him. Don't be afraid of it. He wasn't afraid. He grabbed Quirrell's face with both hands and held on, and the burning went both ways, and he said very clearly into the cold and the dark, "This is not your school, these are not your stones, and I am not what you thought I was." Quirrell collapsed. The darkness in the room moved and screamed with the voice of something that has expected to win for a very long time, and Harry stood in the middle of it with his hands at his sides and his feet planted and his face entirely calm and watched it dissolve. The silence afterward was enormous. Harry stood in it for a moment. The stone was still in his pocket. The mirror stood behind him. Quirrell was on the floor, breathing, diminished and ruined, and in the specific kind of trouble that would require more help than Harry could give him right now. He took the stone out of his pocket and looked at it. Small, red, warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. He put it back in his pocket, walked to the door and went to find Hermione. Chapter 4. What the heir remembered. The summer between first and second year passed the way summers at Hogwarts always did, with a particular quality of golden stillness. The castle enormous and quiet around them, the grounds open and unhurried, the lake glittering through July and August with the kind of indifference to schedules that Harry found deeply restorative after a year of them. He'd spent most of June in the hospital wing, which he found considerably less restorative. Dumbledore had come the morning after the mirror room, when Harry was sitting up in the white bed with Hermione in the chair beside him and the stone on the bedside table between them, and he'd looked at Harry for a long moment with the particular expression that Harry had learned to read on him, the one that contained 3 separate things: relief, calculation, and something that was possibly guilt, but that Dumbledore had spent so many decades managing that it had developed the texture of something else. "You shouldn't have gone down there," Dumbledore said. "You set a trap and used the school to bait it and didn't account for 2 of us," Harry said pleasantly, in the tone Salazar had taught him for delivering accurate assessments to authority figures. "I'd call it roughly even." Dumbledore sat down in the chair on the other side of the bed. He looked, Harry thought, genuinely tired, not the performance of tiredness that powerful people sometimes used to seem relatable, but the actual tiredness of a very old man who had spent a very long night reconsidering things. "The stone will go back to Nicholas," Dumbledore said. "I've spoken to him this morning. He and Perenelle have agreed that it's time." "Good," Hermione said. She said it with the crispness of someone closing a file. It was always going to be the right outcome. The stone was never the point, the stone was the test. Dumbledore looked at her. What was being tested? Whether Voldemort could operate inside the school, she said. Whether he had the reach and the capacity to possess a teacher and move through Hogwarts defenses and get close enough to a target to attempt a resurrection. You needed to know the answer before he tried it somewhere more dangerous. She looked at Dumbledore steadily. "The answer is yes, he can, but it costs him. The possession destroyed Quirrell and set Voldemort back significantly. You got useful information and lost a professor you were already planning to replace." A silence. "You are 11 years old," Dumbledore said. "I'll be 12 in September," Hermione said. Something moved across Dumbledore's face that might in a different man have been laughter. "I see Rowena's influence," he said. "We all have all 4, Harry said. "That's rather the point." Dumbledore nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "I'm beginning to understand that." He stood, picked up the stone from the bedside table, held it for a moment. "I owe you both an apology, not for the plan was necessary, but for not accounting for you fully, for treating you as variables I'd already solved." He looked at Harry specifically. "Your parents would have been extraordinary people to know, Harry, they were, and I think they'd find the person you're becoming," he paused, chose the word carefully, "formidable." He left. Harry sat with that for a while. Formidable was, he suspected, the most Dumbledore thing anyone had ever said to him. Ron had a broken leg from the chess set, which he bore with the philosophical acceptance of someone who had made the calculation himself and stood by the math. He was out of the hospital wing in 3 days, and his mother arrived on the second day and cried over him in a way that he found embarrassing and clearly also needed. And she hugged Harry and Hermione too with the specific ferocity of a woman who has decided to include them in the set of people she worries about, which neither of them knew how to object to and both of them found, privately, a little overwhelming in the best way. "Mrs. Weasley," Hermione said after the hug, sounding slightly surprised at herself. "Don't you Mrs. Weasley me," said Molly Weasley. "You kept my son alive. He kept himself alive. He made a tactical decision. You're a good friend to him," Molly said firmly, which was not an argument Hermione had been prepared to counter. Summer settled in, the students left, the castle exhaled. Salazar didn't bring up the mirror room directly, which was characteristic. He brought it up indirectly, which was more characteristic. It was a Thursday in July, 2 weeks after term had ended, and they were in the sitting room, Harry and Salazar, in the late afternoon light, which came through the west windows and turned everything amber. Harry was reading. Salazar was in the large portrait frame that had been, for as long as Harry could remember, the one he preferred for extended conversations. Dark background, good light, a painted chair that he didn't use because he never sat down, preferring to stand at the painting's edge where the light was sharpest. "You held on," Salazar said without preamble. Harry looked up. "Yes, you could have used the stupefy and stepped back. You had sufficient distance." "I know." "Chose physical contact deliberately, knowing it would burn you both." "He needed to understand something," Harry said, "not just be defeated. He's been in contact with his own legends for 10 years, the great Dark Lord, the one who can't die, the one who was destined to rule." A stupefy just confirmed that he could be disrupted temporarily. But holding on, Harry thought about how to say it that communicated something specific, that what destroyed him the first time isn't gone. That it's here, in this body, walking around, not scared of him. Salazar was quiet for a moment. "That's Gryffindor thinking. I use Slytherin efficiency to deliver a Gryffindor message," Harry said. "You taught me how to do both." Another pause longer. "There's a connection," Salazar said, "between you and what remains of him, the scar. I've been watching it since the mirror room, and I need you to understand something about it." He stepped closer to the painting's edge, which was the gesture he made when he was being as direct as he was capable of being. When Voldemort's curse failed and the remnant of his power had nowhere to go, it divided. The largest part of it went into whatever he became, diminished and wandering. A fragment, a very small fragment, went into the only living thing in the room. Harry held his gaze. "You," Salazar said. "I know, you know." "I've known for 2 years," Harry said. "Rowena figured it out first and told me. She said the fragment is small enough to be dormant most of the time, only active when Voldemort is close or using it. She said it's the reason the scar burns." She said, he stopped, then continued. "She said it's the reason I can speak Parseltongue, that it's not mine exactly, it's his, embedded in me." Salazar looked at him with an expression that was the closest to openly difficult Harry had ever seen on his face. "She told you." "Summers ago, she said I deserved to understand my own situation. And you've been walking around knowing you have a piece of him in your head." "Yes." "And you," Salazar stopped, restarted. "Are you frightened of it?" Harry thought about it honestly. "No, it's been there my whole life. I don't know what I'd be without it," which is a strange thing to say about a fragment of a Dark Lord, but he shrugged. "It's mine now in the sense that it lives in me. I intend to keep understanding it. And I intend to deal with it eventually, properly, in a way that doesn't kill me." He paused. "Rowena is working on the theory. She has thoughts." "Of course she does," Salazar said in a tone that was simultaneously exasperated and proud, which was the tone he defaulted to when he felt both those things and couldn't pick between them. "You were going to tell me this summer," Harry said. "That's why you brought it up now. You've been building up to it." "I was going to tell you when I thought you were ready." "I was ready at 9. "You were prepared at 9, Salazar corrected. "Ready is different. Ready means you can hear it without it changing who you are." He looked at Harry. "You heard it at 9 and it didn't change who you are, which means Rowena was right to tell you and I was," a pause, overcautious. It was the closest Salazar Slytherin would ever come to saying he was wrong about a personal decision, and Harry treated it with appropriate respect by not making a large deal of it. "It's fine," Harry said simply. Salazar looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "it is." Second year began in September with the specific energy of a school that had survived something and was moving forward with a slightly different quality of attention. There was a new defense professor, Gilderoy Lockhart, who arrived with the presence of a man who had confused fame with capability and had been getting away with this confusion for some time. He had a smile that was practiced to the cell and hair that performed confidence on his behalf, and he looked at Harry on the first day of class with the expression of a man who has decided that association with someone famous is the next best thing to being famous yourself. Harry looked back at him with the liar's caught face and identified within about 40 seconds that every word Lockhart said about his own adventures was a lie, not a partial embellishment or an enthusiastic exaggeration. A comprehensive architectural lie built over years with the particular quality of falsehood that comes from someone who has told the same stories so many times they've started to believe them. He mentioned this to Hermione at dinner. "I know," she said. "You knew already. I read all his books over summer. The magical signatures in the described events don't match his recorded capability level. He's moderately talented at memory charms and that's essentially it." She ate a spoonful of soup. He's been obliviating the actual people who performed the achievements and then publishing them as his own. Harry absorbed this. That's impressively terrible. It's also a crime, she said. Not one anyone's going to prosecute because the victims don't remember and Lockhart is very famous and the ministry has other priorities. She paused. I'm keeping a record. Of course you are. He's going to cause a problem at some point, she said. Famous incompetents always do. I want to have documentation ready. Ron, on Harry's other side, said, I actually liked his book about the Banshee. He didn't write it, Hermione said. Aesthetically, though, the cover, Ron, right. Yes, terrible man. The school year found its rhythm, different from the first year in the way second years are different, more settled, more socially established, the initial wonder of everything worn down to something more durable and specific. Harry had Quidditch and the comfortable architecture of a friendship with Ron that had become load-bearing without anyone formally declaring it. Hermione had Susan Bones and 3 other Hufflepuffs she'd accumulated through the sheer force of being interesting and useful, and a relationship with the Hogwarts library that Madame Pince had long since upgraded to something approaching collegial. Draco Malfoy came back to school in September with a new quality in his silences around Harry, and Harry noticed it the way he noticed all the small shifts, catalogued it, waited, said nothing. The first attack happened in October. Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, was found petrified in a corridor near the second-floor girls' bathroom, stretched rigid, eyes glassy, the way things looked when they'd been hit with a very specific and very old class of dark magic that had no business being in a school. The writing on the wall above her was in blood, real blood as it turned out, though Hermione, who examined the chemical composition with a diagnostic charm Rowena had taught her, said it was from a freshly killed rooster and not from a person, which was relevant. The chamber of SECITS has been OPNED. Enemies of the air, beware. Harry read it twice. Hermione read it twice. Ron read it and went the specific shade of pale he went when something turned out to be significantly more alarming than he'd been hoping. The students gathered around the scene were making noise, frightened and excited in roughly equal measure, and in the middle of it, Draco Malfoy pushed through to the front, read the words and said very loudly, Enemies of the air, beware, you'll be next, mudbloods. The word landed in the crowd like a stone into water. Hermione didn't flinch. Harry turned to look at Draco, and what he saw on Draco's face was complicated in a way it hadn't been before. The performance was there, the practiced contempt, the Malfoy-shaped armor that Lucius had spent 12 years building, but underneath it was something specific. Something that wasn't quite fear but was fear's neighbor. Something that looked like a person who has just heard a thing they were hoping not to hear. He wasn't crowing, he was checking. He's afraid it's real, Harry thought. He's afraid the chamber is actually open, and he's making a lot of noise to cover how afraid he is. Which meant Draco Malfoy didn't know about the Chamber of Secrets. His father knew about it. Harry was fairly certain Lucius Malfoy knew everything there was to know about Salazar Slytherin's hidden history, and had passed on the ideology without passing on the actual information, the way people who use other people's beliefs as tools tend to do. Draco was performing Slytherin's legacy without knowing what that legacy actually was. Harry filed this away. He kept the liar's caught face entirely still and watched Malfoy push back through the crowd and walk away, and he thought, You're going to need to know the truth before this year is over, and I'm not sure you're going to like it. He told Salazar that evening. Salazar received the news of the writing on the wall with the stillness of someone who has been expecting news they didn't want. He was in the dark portrait frame, and in the amber light of the sitting room fire he looked older than he usually did, which was saying something for a man who had been dead for 9 centuries. The monster, he said, is it what I think it is? What do you think it is? Harry had done the reading. Hermione had done considerably more reading, presented him with a written summary that was 7 pages long and included footnotes. A basilisk, he said. You put a basilisk in the chamber. You use Parseltongue to control it, and the chamber connects to the school's plumbing, which is how it's moving through the castle without being seen. Yes, Salazar said, one word, and the weight of it in the room was considerable. How old is it? Harry asked. When I placed it, it was 60 years old. Salazar paused. A basilisk's lifespan is measured in centuries. The one that is alive in this castle right now is roughly 1,000 years old. Another pause. It is very large. Harry sat with that, and it's been down there the whole time since you built it. Since I built it. Waiting. I said it to respond to the heir of Slytherin, Salazar said. The words came out with a specific quality, not quite apology, not quite self-condemnation, but something in the register of a man who is looking at something he built and seeing it clearly for possibly the first time. A Parseltongue speaker with enough Slytherin bloodline resonance to be recognized. I built the recognition into the chamber's magic. The idea was, he stopped. The idea was to have a weapon, Harry said, not cruelly, just accurately. Yes, to use against Muggle-borns. Yes, Salazar said it the way he said difficult true things flatly without flinching, because flinching was a form of dishonesty. I built a weapon into the school I was proudest of, and I told myself it was protection, and it was what I've spent 9 centuries being ashamed of, and I've never said that word to either of you because the word felt too small for the size of what I did. He looked at Harry directly. I am ashamed of this specific thing more than anything else I've done or failed to do. The sitting room was very quiet. I know, Harry said. You've always known. I've known since you told us about it when we were 8. I knew from the way you described it. Harry held his gaze. You didn't have to tell us, you chose to, and you told it clearly and without softening it, and that was more honest than most living people manage about the worst things they've done. He paused. I never blamed you for the thing. I've only ever been grateful you told us the truth. Salazar looked at him for a long moment. Then very quietly he said, someone opened it. Someone with Parseltongue, Harry said, or someone who found another way to access the controls. He thought about it. Voldemort is the last confirmed heir of Slytherin, but he's not in a body. He's looking for one, Salazar said. A different method of return. The stone failed. He'll be desperate and he'll be inventive, and he will have had all summer to think about alternatives. He paused. There are objects, dark objects, the worst kind, which I'm ashamed to know the theory of, that can contain a fragment of a soul. Preserve it, house it until conditions are right for restoration. Another pause. If he created such an object before his fall, a vessel, Harry said, with enough residual personality to act independently if given the right host, Salazar said. Something that could whisper into the right ear, make the right person compliant, and eventually open. They looked at each other. He's been planning for failure since before he fell, Harry said. He put contingencies in place. How many? I don't know. I've been thinking about this since July and I don't have a number. Hermione needs to know this. She'll have already worked out the vessel part, Salazar said. I've been teaching her dark arts theory since she was 9, and she has the most coherent understanding of soul magic of any student I've encountered in 3 centuries. The chamber is the immediate problem, Harry said, pulling himself back to the present tense. Someone is controlling the basilisk and attacking students. It started with the cat. It'll escalate. What do we do? Find the vessel, Salazar said. Find the object being used to control the basilisk and destroy it, and the basilisk loses its controller. Without a Parseltongue speaker directing it, it will retreat to the chamber. He paused. There's more. Tell me. You'll need to go to the chamber, eventually, not to fight the basilisk, not yet, not unless it comes to that, but to understand the control system. I built it. I understand how it can be dismantled. But the mechanism requires physical presence, and it requires Parseltongue. And you, he looked at Harry, are the only person alive I would trust with both. Harry nodded. I know. I was always going to be the one to go. I know you know, Salazar said, in the tone that was an echo of something Helga had said in the spring, which Harry didn't think was an accident. The attacks continued through October and into November. Colin Creevey, a first-year Gryffindor with a camera and a talent for being in the wrong place, was found petrified outside the hospital wing. 2 Hufflepuff students in November. Each time the pattern was the same, petrified not dead, which was notable because a direct basilisk gaze killed. Something was diffusing the gaze, reflected surfaces, water, something indirect. Hermione had a theory. She had, as Salazar had predicted, already developed the soul vessel framework independently, and she dropped it onto the library table in front of Harry one Tuesday in October like a completed piece of work she'd been holding until she was satisfied with it. A diary, she said. Harry looked at the parchment she'd pushed toward him. Her handwriting was dense and organized, moving from theory to evidence to conclusion in the tight logical progression of someone who had learned from Rowena that an argument was only as good as its least supported claim. Soul vessel magic requires a medium that's been heavily imbued with personality over time, she said. Not a made object, something that started mundane and became significant through use. Writing is the most direct method because it's a literal record of thought. A diary that someone wrote inconsistently over an extended period, with strong magical ability and strong emotional investment, becomes a repository, Harry said. And if you deliberately put a fragment of yourself into it, it becomes a vessel that can interact, think, plan, manipulate. It would look like a book. It wouldn't feel dangerous. Someone new to the magical world might write in it, confide in it, not realizing that something was reading back. She paused. We need to find it. It's already in the school, Harry said. It has to be. Someone brought it in at the start of term or before. Or it was already here, Hermione said. Hidden years ago, put in place in advance of all of this. They looked at each other. Lucius Malfoy, Harry said. Possibly. He's a known Death Eater who escaped prosecution by claiming coercion. He has the connections, the motive, and according to Susan's research, he was on the school board until Dumbledore had him removed last year. She folded her hands on the table. And Draco came back to school this year with something different about him, Harry said. I noticed. He was given something, Hermione said, or put in proximity to something. His behavior at the start of term, the diary could have been passed to him without his understanding what it was. Lucius could have used him as a delivery mechanism, which means Draco might not know what he's carrying, Harry said, or carried past tense if it's already been put to use. Hermione looked at him steadily. We need to talk to him. Yes, Harry agreed, carefully. Draco Malfoy was, Harry had determined over 14 months of observation, a person in the specific position of someone whose entire map of the world has developed a fault line, and who is coping with this by pressing harder on the map and hoping the fault line goes away. He performed his house's expected attitudes with slightly more force than before. laughed slightly louder, walked slightly taller, and made slightly more use of the word mudblood than he had in first year, all of which Harry recognized as the behavioral signature of someone who is not sure of something they used to be sure of and is using performance to fill the gap. He was also, Harry had noticed, spending time in the library. Not for studying, he had a look when he was studying, and this wasn't it. He was looking for something, reading old histories, pulling specific books on Hogwarts foundations and architecture and the history of the four houses. He was trying to understand what Salazar Slytherin actually was. Harry sat down across from him in the library on a Thursday in November without preamble or performance, and Draco looked up from a book with an expression that cycled through surprise, hostility, and then something that was trying to decide what came next. "I know you're reading about him," Harry said. "Reading about who?" "Don't," Harry said pleasantly. "We're past that. You've been reading about Slytherin for 6 weeks. You're doing it because something this year isn't fitting the version of him you were taught, and you're trying to reconcile the difference. I'm here to help with that." Draco stared at him. "Why would you?" "Because the chamber is open and people are getting hurt, and I think your father gave you something at the start of term that you didn't understand, and that is directly relevant to both of those things." Harry held his gaze. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm telling you what I think happened so you can tell me if I'm wrong." The expression on Draco's face was fascinating. Harry watched the armor crack, watched it specifically the way you watch something structural shift when the foundation moves, and behind it was something raw and young and genuinely frightened. Not of Harry, of the situation, of what the situation meant. "My father gave me something," Draco said slowly. "At Diagon Alley, he put it in my transfiguration book when Madame Malkin had us getting fitted." He stopped. "An old diary. He said it was a family heirloom. He said I'd understand it when the time was right." "Did you write in it?" A pause. "Once, I wrote in it once and it wrote back," and Draco's voice had changed, losing its performed quality entirely, going to something that was just the voice of a 12-year-old boy who was frightened. "I didn't like it. The writing felt wrong. I put it away and I didn't touch it again." "Where is it now?" "Moaning Myrtle's bathroom," Draco said. "I put it down a sink drain in September. I didn't want it near me anymore." Harry looked at him for a long moment. "You felt that it was wrong," he said. "You were right. Your instincts were accurate." He paused. "Do you know what it is?" "No." "A soul vessel. A fragment of Voldemort preserved in a diary designed to open the Chamber of Secrets and do what your father and the rest of the Death Eaters couldn't do during the war." He said it clearly, without cruelty, in the manner of someone for whom accuracy was more important than comfort. "Your father used you to deliver it into the school." The expression on Draco's face was something Harry didn't have a simple name for. Betrayal was part of it. But it was complicated by the fact that Draco wasn't ready to call it betrayal, wasn't ready to apply that word to Lucius, because applying that word meant dismantling something he'd built his whole identity around. "He wouldn't," Draco started. "He would," Harry said, not unkindly. "He did, not because he doesn't care about you, probably, but because people who care about an ideology more than they care about their children do things like this. It doesn't mean he doesn't love you, it means he loves something else more." He held Draco's gaze. "I'm sorry, that's a terrible thing to know about a parent." Draco looked at the table. "You've known the whole time," he said. "Not the whole time. We worked it out this term." "We, Hermione and I." Something moved across Draco's face at Hermione's name, the ghost of the old contempt, and then the ghost of the ghost, which was fainter. "She's you two work together. We always have. She's better than I said she was," Draco said quietly, not to Harry specifically, more to the table. She's better than most people I know. I've known that since September last year, and I've been saying other things," and he stopped. "Is that what Slytherin actually was, before the history?" He looked up. "Because what you've said he is, what I've read he was, it's not what I was taught." "No," Harry said, "it's not, but I'll tell you something about Salazar, something he told me. He said the worst thing he ever did was mistake contempt for wisdom, and when he understood the mistake," Harry paused, "it was the beginning of everything better about him." Draco was quiet for a long moment. "The diary is in the sink drain," he said eventually. "I'll get it," Harry said. "Potter." Draco met his eyes. "Don't tell everyone it was me about the diary." "I'll tell who needs to know, no more than that." Draco nodded, looked at his book again. "The chapter I'm reading says Slytherin left the school after an argument with Gryffindor about admissions policy." He said it with the particular careful tone of someone testing how close they can get to a thing that changes everything. Is that accurate?" "Mostly," Harry said. "He left because he believed something that the others didn't. He spent 900 years deciding whether he was right." Harry stood. "Ask him yourself. He's in the East Wing, second frame from the left. He doesn't give audiences, but he makes exceptions." He left Draco with his book and his fault line and the long, difficult work of revising a map. The diary was in the second trap drain on the left side of Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, which Myrtle confirmed with the enthusiastic specificity of a person who has been watching the drain for 2 months and is delighted to finally be consulted about it. Harry retrieved it with a pair of summoning charms and held it in his hands for a moment, feeling the specific wrongness of it, not dark in the dramatic sense, no visible malevolence, just the subtle quality of a thing that contained something it wasn't supposed to contain. Hermione examined it that evening. She used every diagnostic charm Rowena had ever taught her plus several that she'd developed herself since, And she came back with her conclusions organized and her expression serious in the specific way it got when she was certain of something she didn't like. "It's a Horcrux," she said. The word landed in the room. "You're sure?" Harry said. "I'm sure it matches Rowena's theoretical description exactly. A fragment of soul embedded in an object through an act of murder. The murder splits the soul and the fragment is anchored to the vessel. Destroy the vessel and you destroy the fragment." She set the diary down on the table between them. "He made multiple. We suspected that last year. This confirms it." "If he made multiple," Harry said, "then he can't be permanently destroyed until all of them are." "Correct. Killing the body doesn't kill the soul fragments. They persist and they provide anchors ways back." She looked at him. He built himself a network of contingencies, multiple soul fragments, multiple objects, multiple paths to resurrection. He was planning not to die long before he didn't die. Harry looked at the diary. "This one needs to be destroyed." "Yes, and we need to tell Rowena and Salazar everything so they can start building a picture of how many there might be." "Salazar will know the theory," Harry said. "He knows the magic. He won't like it, but he'll know. He'll want to be useful," Hermione said. "He always converts guilt into usefulness. Let him." Harry looked at her. "When did you get that perceptive about him?" "I've been watching him since I was 3, she said. "He does the same thing every time he's ashamed. He finds the problem that's adjacent to the shame and solves it as hard as he can. It's how he apologizes." She paused. "It's also how he loves people, which I think is something you already knew." "Yeah," Harry said softly. "I knew." She picked up the diary. "How do we destroy it?" "Not here, not with regular magic that won't work on a Horcrux. Basilisk venom would do it, or something similarly corrosive to the soul." He paused. "Which brings us back to the chamber." "You need to go down there," she said. "We need to go down there," he corrected. She looked at him for a moment. "Not arguing, just measuring. You and me. You and me. Salazar comes in the only way he can in here." Harry tapped his temple. "He knows the chamber. He built it. He can guide us through the Parseltongue control system. And the basilisk, if we avoid direct eye contact, that's an extremely large if, Harry. I know, we use indirect contact until we can shut down the control system. Once the voice commanding it is gone, the diary, the fragment, the basilisk should retreat on its own. But if it doesn't," he looked at her steadily. "If it doesn't, then I'll deal with it." "How?" "I'll figure that out when I'm in the room," he said with the specific calm confidence that Hermione had long since learned wasn't recklessness. It was the confidence of someone who has been prepared for a long time and trusts the preparation. She looked at him for a long, measuring moment. "Then we go on the weekend." "Saturday." "Saturday," she agreed. They told the founders on Friday evening, all 4 of them in the sitting room, the full account from September to this moment. Godric listened with increasing energy, which was how he processed things that alarmed him. He became more animated rather than less, as though movement kept the alarm from settling into something heavier. Helga was very still, which was her version of the same thing. Rowena listened with her arms crossed and her eyes moving between Harry and Hermione with the focused attention of a problem being assessed. Salazar didn't move at all. He stood in the dark frame and listened, and his face gave very little away, but Harry, who knew his face better than most, saw everything. The specific quality of a man who has been dreading a conversation for 900 years and is now inside it, and finding that the inside is both worse and less terrible than the outside. When Harry finished, Salazar said, "I built the control system. I can walk you through it. The chamber's entry responds to Parseltongue and to the specific resonance of my magical signature, which exists in you through the fragment of Voldemort's power. The Parseltongue is his, which is mine, which becomes accessible to you through the connection." "The enemy of my enemy," Rowena said dryly. "The magic of my worst student in my oldest student," Salazar said, with an edge that was self-directed. "There's a lever mechanism in the chamber's inner sanctum that controls the basilisk's instruction set. I built it to respond to a command phrase in Parseltongue. You'll need to say it exactly." "Tell me," Harry said. Salazar told him. Harry repeated it back 3 times until the pronunciation was right, which Salazar confirmed with the focused attention of someone for whom accuracy in this specific thing mattered enormously. "Hermione," Salazar said, shifting his attention. "The diary. It needs basilisk venom," she said. "Yes, the basilisk will be in the chamber. You'll need to extract venom without dying," Hermione said. "I know, I have a plan for that." "Tell me," she told him. The plan was elegant, which was the word Salazar would have used if he'd allowed himself to use it, and he spent 3 minutes identifying structural problems with it, and she spent 3 minutes resolving each one, and the exchange had the quality of a very fast, very high-stakes tutorial that both of them were doing with the focused pleasure of minds that operated best under genuine pressure. "Good," he said finally, which from him was what other people meant by extraordinary. Helga waited until the planning was done. Then she said, "Before tomorrow, come here." Harry and Hermione moved toward her portrait. She was in the painted herb garden, the one that smelled like cinnamon if you got close enough, and she looked at them with the specific expression she'd been wearing since Harry was small, the one that contained everything she felt about them and made no attempt to organize or restrain any of it. "I need you to understand something," she said, "about tomorrow. About all the tomorrows like it that are going to come after this one, because there will be more, you know that." She looked at Harry, then Hermione, then back. "You are the bravest people I know, not because you're fearless, because you're afraid and you do it anyway for the right reasons. And I want you to know her voice was steady because Helga Hufflepuff had 9 centuries of practice making her voice steady when she needed it, that whatever happens we are with you, not in the corridors, not in the we can't go where you're going tomorrow, but we are with you the way the foundation is with the building, the way the roots are with the tree. She paused. You were never alone, not once, and you never will be. Neither Harry nor Hermione said anything immediately. Then Hermione said in the particular careful voice she used for things that were too large for ordinary language, I know, we know. Good, Helga said simply. Godric made a noise that was aggressively not a sob and looked at the painted ceiling of his frame. Rowena pressed her lips together and looked at her hands. Salazar in the dark frame turned slightly away from the light, which was either the portrait equivalent of privacy or the portrait equivalent of not wanting anyone to see his face, and those were the same thing. Harry looked at them, all 4 of them, the family he'd been given by a castle and a disaster, and the specific mercy of 4 dead people who had chosen, against all odds and several of their own better judgments, to love 2 children who needed loving. Thank you, he said, not for tonight, for everything. Saturday morning came grey and quiet, the November light thin and flat through the castle windows, and Harry and Hermione went to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom at 7 o'clock when the corridors were empty. Myrtle was unusually not present. Harry would later think that was probably significant, the sink drain. Parseltongue to open it, open, just that, just the intent of it spoken in the right language, and the sink moved aside and the entrance yawned dark below them, wide enough to climb down with the particular quality of deep old dark that places underground have when they've been sealed for centuries. They went in. The descent was a long slant down through stone that was ancient and close and smelled of water and something older than water, and when they landed it was on the damp floor of a passage that stretched ahead in both directions and was lit by the specific cold green-blue quality of magic that had been left unattended for a very long time and was still somehow burning. Straight, Harry said. He could feel the direction. Salazar's voice in his memory, walking him through the layout, combined with the specific pull of his own Parseltongue sense toward the oldest snake magic in the building. They moved straight. The passage opened into a larger corridor, ornate with stone serpents on the walls, hundreds of them carved in relief so detailed they seemed to shift when the light moved, and the temperature dropped and the smell got stronger, and Harry kept his eyes forward and his breathing steady and said under his breath in Parseltongue, I am here. I am the heir. I am returning. The walls seemed to respond. Something in the stone recognized the claim, not warmly exactly, but with the impersonal acknowledgement of ancient magic responding to the correct key. A door at the end, enormous, circular, with more carved serpents and a locking mechanism that required the same Parseltongue key, and Harry spoke it and the door opened. The Chamber of Secrets was vast. Even having been told about it, even having imagined it, it was vast. The ceiling was lost in shadow. The floor was covered in a thin layer of standing water, perfectly still, reflecting the green-lit columns that ran the length of it. At the far end, a stone face the size of a house, Salazar Slytherin's face, carved with the specific kind of artistry that meant someone had spent a long time on it and also had very high opinions of their own bone structure. And on the floor before the statue, lying very still and very large, was the basilisk. It was not asleep. It was still, controlled, waiting, and its eyes were closed, which was the only mercy. It was enormous. 1,000 years of growth in an underground chamber had produced something that made Harry, who had read everything about basilisks that Rowena's library contained, recalibrate every scale he'd been using. In the water between the entrance and the statue, something else. A figure, translucent and moving, not a ghost but close, the kind of projected presence that a soul vessel cast when it was nearly active. Young male, handsome in the specific polished way of someone who has always known they were handsome. He turned as they entered. Tom Riddle, not Voldemort's diminished remnant, the young version, the diary's version, preserved in the memory of who Tom Riddle had been at 16. He had Voldemort's eyes already, though the same cold quality, and he looked at Harry with an expression that was trying to be confident but had something watching underneath it. Harry Potter, he said, I wondered if you'd come. Everyone keeps saying that, Harry said. The projection's expression shifted slightly. You're not frightened. No, you should be. The basilisk is, don't, Harry said, and his voice carried the flat authority of someone who has been trained by Salazar Slytherin for 6 years in the specific art of ending conversations at the right moment. Don't finish that sentence. I know what the basilisk is, and I know what you are, and I know what the diary is, and I've already decided what happens next. The only variable is how much of the next 5 minutes you want to spend talking. The projection looked at him with something that was now, underneath the performance, genuine reassessment. You're not what I expected. No, Harry said. I know that's a problem for you. He glanced at Hermione. She was already moving sideways, careful, keeping the basilisk's closed eyes in her peripheral vision and moving toward the control mechanism that Salazar had described on the left wall of the chamber 40 feet from the entrance. Tom Riddle's projection tracked her movement. Stop her, he said to the basilisk. The basilisk's head moved. Its eyes remained closed, some remnant of the control system, some specific constraint that Salazar had built in about not opening the eyes in the chamber itself, which Harry had been counting on. Harry put himself between the basilisk and Hermione and said in Parseltongue very clearly, "Stay." The basilisk stopped. Tom Riddle stared. "You're a Parselmouth," he said, and now there was something in his voice that wasn't performance at all. "You're actually, I know where I got it from," Harry said, still in the same flat tone. "Don't flatter yourself." The projection's face changed. "You know about the—" "I know about all of it," Harry said. "The Horcruxes, the soul fragments, your entire contingency plan." He walked forward toward the projection, toward the statue, keeping the basilisk's stillness in the edge of his awareness. "You've spent 30 years building a labyrinth of contingencies, and you didn't put me in any of them because you didn't know I existed the way I actually exist. You knew a baby who survived a curse. You didn't plan for what that baby had become." Behind him, the sound of metal, the control mechanism. Hermione's voice, precise and calm, speaking the command phrase Harry had given her last night, the one Salazar had taught. The basilisk went still in a different way. The controlled waiting became something else, older, more animal, the stillness of a creature released from a leash it has worn for centuries. It didn't move toward any of them. It simply was, enormous and ancient and temporarily undirected, and Harry kept his position between it and Hermione because that was the job. Tom Riddle looked at Hermione, at the mechanism she'd just used, back at Harry, and his projection flickered, which was the visual equivalent of a calculation failing. "The diary," Harry said to Hermione. She produced it from her bag. She'd brought a glass jar collected before they'd come down. She'd been very specific about this, and Salazar had confirmed the method, and there was one basilisk fang on the chamber floor near the statue's base, shed years ago, still lethal with venom. She'd brought the jar for exactly this. She picked up the fang, very carefully. Long-handled gripper she'd transfigured from a piece of wood. She looked at the diary. She plunged the fang through the cover. The diary screamed. That was the only word for it, a sound that came from the object and from Tom Riddle's projection simultaneously, high and terrible and wrong, the sound of something that was never supposed to ending. Black ink poured from the wounds in the cover like blood, spreading into the water on the chamber floor, and Tom Riddle's projection tore apart, not dramatically, not with Voldemort's dramatic darkness from the previous year, but with the specific ugly violence of a thing that existed only in pretense, finally losing the pretense. Gone. The chamber was quiet. The basilisk raised its head. Harry turned to face it, and the basilisk was looking at him, not with its lethal direct gaze, but with its head low, with the specific body language of a creature that has been constrained for a very long time and is not sure, in the absence of constraint, what it is supposed to do. Harry spoke to it in Parseltongue, not commands. He didn't command it. He said, "It's over. You've been here long enough. Go deep, rest. No one will call you again." The basilisk looked at him for a long moment. A 1,000-year-old animal that had spent its entire existence in a stone room underground, doing what it was told, in service of a purpose that had nothing to do with its own nature. It lowered its head. It turned. It moved impossibly slowly for something its size toward the deeper passages beyond the statue, toward whatever lay beyond the chamber's main hall, deeper and further, the place it had come from before Salazar had given it its purpose. They listened until the sound of it moving was gone. Then the chamber was completely, utterly quiet, and Harry and Hermione stood in the cold, still water and the green light, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "Salazar was right," Hermione said eventually, "about the control mechanism. It worked exactly as he described. He built it," Harry said. "He knew every part of it." She looked at the ink spreading in the water, at the ruined diary. "One Horcrux," she said, "one out of however many." "However many," Harry agreed. "Rowena's going to want a complete strategic framework by Monday." "Obviously." She looked at him. They were both cold, both damp, both covered in various amounts of dust and ink and the general physical evidence of an experience that most 12-year-olds would have considered either impossible or the worst day of their lives. Hermione looked at him with the expression she wore when she was deciding not to say something obvious. "We should go back up," she said instead. "We should," Harry agreed. "You said it right, by the way, the phrase Salazar taught you, your Parseltongue pronunciation was correct. Was that in doubt?" "No," she said, "I'm just noting it." A pause. "He'll be glad. He'll never say so." "That's what I'm for," she said with the smallest possible smile, and led the way back through the chamber toward the passage. Harry followed her, and the green light went with them, and behind them the Chamber of Secrets settled into the oldest silence it had known in 1,000 years. Above them Hogwarts breathed. Chapter 5. The Shape of Fear. Third year arrived with a Dementor on the Hogwarts Express. Harry felt it before he saw it, a drop in temperature that had nothing to do with weather, a specific quality of cold that reached through the compartment walls and pressed against the inside of his chest with the particular intimacy of something that knew exactly where to look for what hurt most. The lights dimmed, the train slowed, Ron went pale. Hermione, sitting across from them in the compartment they shared with a sleeping stranger whose battered case was tagged with the name Professor R.J. Lupin, gripped the edge of her seat with both hands and said nothing, which was unusual enough that Harry registered it immediately. The compartment door opened, and the Dementor filled the frame. There was no other word for it. It didn't enter so much as arrive, a cold presence in tattered robes, with the quality of something that had been draining warmth from every room it had ever been in for so long that warmth itself flinched in its direction. Harry felt the cold move through him, and the sounds began, the sounds that were not sounds, the specific audio of his worst moments rising up from wherever they lived and making themselves the loudest thing in the room. His mother's voice, high and terrified and then cut off. He'd known this was possible. Rowena had warned him about the Dementor effect on traumatic memory. She'd given him the theory, the mechanism, the reason it happened. Knowing didn't insulate him from it completely, but it gave him something to hold on to, a framework, a way to be inside the experience without being lost in it. He pulled out his wand. "Harry," Hermione said, sharp. "I know," he said. He knew the Patronus charm was third-year material, technically. He'd been working on it for 6 months, since Helga had told him the Dementors were coming to the school and suggested he'd want to be ready. He hadn't quite gotten there yet. He had the theory perfectly and the practical element almost, which in a genuine confrontation was the worst possible place to be. The chocolate hit him in the shoulder. Not metaphorically, the sleeping professor had woken up, was entirely alert in the way of someone who'd already been awake for a while, and he produced a piece of chocolate from his pocket and threw it at Harry with the casual accuracy of a man who has done this before. Then he pointed his wand at the Dementor and said expecto patronum with the ease of someone for whom the charm is as natural as breathing, and a large silver wolf flooded the compartment with light, and the Dementor withdrew. The professor handed Ron chocolate, handed Hermione chocolate, looked at Harry. "Eat it," he said. "It helps." His voice was gentle and very tired and had something underneath it that Harry identified in the way he identified things about people as someone who knows the Dementor effect personally and recently. Harry ate the chocolate. Lupin sat back down and closed his eyes, and they sat in the returning warmth of the compartment, and the train moved again, and Harry looked at the new professor, the patched robes, the worn case, the face that was thin in a way that suggested more than ordinary tiredness, and thought, "You're going to be interesting." Hermione caught his eye. She was thinking the same thing. Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban in August, and the news reached Hogwarts via every available route simultaneously. The Prophet, Ministry Owls, official staff announcement, and Godric, who came through the portrait network at 6 in the morning, already in the middle of an opinion about it. "He's innocent," Godric said as Harry was putting on his shoes. Harry looked up. "Who is Sirius Black?" Godric had the specific energy he got when he knew something exciting and was imperfectly containing it. "Not entirely well. The truth is complicated, but the central accusation is wrong. He didn't betray your parents." Harry went still. "How do you know?" "Because I knew Sirius Black," Godric said, and for once the drama was absent from his voice, replaced with something simple and direct that carried more weight for its simplicity. "He was a Gryffindor's Gryffindor, and I don't use that loosely. He would not have betrayed James Potter. He loved James like a brother, and he was your father's secret keeper." And he stopped. "There's a rat, that's the piece that matters. A man named Peter Pettigrew who everyone thinks Sirius killed and who is very much alive, and the truth of that night is considerably different from the official record." Harry absorbed this. He'd known about Sirius Black the way he knew about most things in his own history, through the Founders, who had given him facts when he asked for them. Sirius Black, named as his father's secret keeper. Sirius Black, who had apparently betrayed that secret. Sirius Black, who had murdered 13 people in a street and laughed. "Where did you hear this?" he asked Godric. "I talked to portraits in other parts of the castle," Godric said, with the slight defensive energy of someone who has been caught gossiping and is reframing it as intelligence gathering. "There are portraits that have been in this building since Sirius Black was a student, and portraits that communicate with the Black family home, and over 900 years I've developed a network of considerable—" "Godric, the point is I'm confident." He leaned forward in the frame. "He's coming here. I don't know when or how, but Sirius Black is coming to Hogwarts because you're here, Harry, and whether his reasons are protective or desperate or something more complicated than either, he will come, and when he does," he looked at Harry with the specific expression he wore when he was being genuinely serious, which was rare enough that it always landed. "I want you to listen before you act." "I always listen before I act," Harry said. "You listen very quickly," Godric said. "Sometimes you could listen slightly longer." Lupin turned out to be the best defense against the dark arts teacher Hogwarts had had in decades, which was not a high bar given the preceding 2 years, but which Lupin cleared by such a significant margin that the comparison became irrelevant. He taught as though defense was a physical craft as much as a magical one, muscle memory, instinct, the relationship between fear and response. He taught the Boggart lesson in the second week of term, which was standard third-year curriculum, but he taught it with something extra, not just the mechanics of the ridiculous charm, but the underlying theory of what a Boggart was exploiting and how to interrupt the exploitation at its source. "Fear," he said, standing in front of the wardrobe that was rattling and shifting with the Boggart inside it, "is not the enemy. Fear is information. The Boggart succeeds not because your fear is real, but because it catches you in the gap between feeling afraid and knowing that you can act anyway. Close that gap." He tapped his temple, "and the Boggart has nothing to work with." Harry had heard this concept before. Helga had said something adjacent to it when he was 6, and Salazar had said something more precise about it when he was 8, and the way Lupin said it now had the same quality of genuine understanding rather than performed wisdom. Liked Lupin immediately in the uncomplicated way he liked people who said true things as though truth was simply what you said. The boggart came to him when it was his turn. The other students stepped back and the boggart shifted, and Harry watched it with the specific focused attention of someone who has been thinking about this since the lesson was announced. He was expecting a Dementor. That was the obvious answer, the fear that the Dementor on the train had surfaced and the whole school had witnessed. What he got instead stopped him for just a moment. A graveyard, or rather the idea of a graveyard, a stone slab and darkness, and on the slab 4 portraits, 4 empty frames, gold and dark green and blue and yellow, and all of them empty. He hadn't anticipated that. He stood with it for a second, just a second. Then he raised his wand and said ridiculous, and the portraits filled with the most ridiculous painted versions of his guardians he could conjure. Godric with the wrong-sized armor, Helga covered in comically enormous flowers, Rowena wearing a hat with question marks on it, Salazar with an expression of absolute outrage at the indignity of being rendered cartoonishly. The class laughed. The boggart dispersed. Harry stepped back and the next student moved up, and he stood in the line with the laughter around him and the image already fading the way boggart images faded, but the truth of it staying clear. His worst fear was not Voldemort, not pain, not death. His worst fear was losing the people who had built him. He told Hermione after class. They were walking back through the corridors toward the Great Hall, and the weather outside was autumn bright, and he told her flatly and she listened without interrupting, which was how she listened to things that mattered. That makes complete sense, she said when he'd finished. Most people would expect Voldemort or a Dementor or your parents dying again, she said. But your relationship with Voldemort isn't fear, it's opposition. You don't fear him, you're preparing to stop him, that's different. And your parents, she paused, chose the words carefully, you lost them before you could know them. The grief is real, but the fear of losing them again requires a present tense threat. What you have in the present tense, what you love in the right now is them. She said it simply. Of course that's your worst fear. He walked with that for a moment. What was yours? She'd had her own boggart turn, and he'd watched it from the line. It had produced briefly a version of a scene he hadn't been able to see clearly before she'd said ridiculous and dispelled it. She'd told him it was one of the Founders' frames, empty singular, but she dispelled it too quickly for him to see which. She looked at the corridor ahead. Helga's frame, she said quietly. Empty, he understood. Helga was the one who had sat with Hermione through the worst of it at 3 years old when everything hurt. Helga was the shape of the word mother in Hermione's internal vocabulary, the form that care had taken when Hermione needed care most. The fear was the same as his, wearing a different face. We should tell her, Harry said. She already knows, Hermione said. She's Helga, she always knows. We should tell her anyway. Yes, Hermione agreed, we should. Lupin pulled Harry aside after the following week's lesson, when the classroom had emptied and the October light was making long rectangles across the stone floor. He did it with the particular deliberateness of someone who has been deciding whether to do it for some time and has finally decided. You handled the boggart well, he said, both the shock and the response. It surprised me, Harry said honestly. Most meaningful boggarts do. Lupin moved to his desk, sat on the edge of it in the relaxed way that was characteristic of him. Everything about him had a quality of deliberate ease, like someone who had learned that tension was expensive and conservation mattered. I'd like to teach you the Patronus charm. Harry looked at him. That's 7th year material, technically, but you were thinking about your wand on the train when the Dementor came in, and that instinct was correct even if the spell wasn't there yet. I'd like to give you the spell. He paused. The Dementors are going to be on the school grounds all year. They make mistakes. They're not supposed to enter the building, but they're not reliable about their own rules. He looked at Harry directly. I knew your parents, your father and we were close friends, and I would prefer you to be able to drive them away rather than depending on the luck of a professor being in the right compartment. Harry held his gaze. You knew my father. Since we were 11 years old. Something moved across Lupin's face, not the performed grief that people who didn't know his parents sometimes showed him, but something real and much older. James was, he stopped, and the stop was eloquent. He was my friend, my best friend technically, along with 2 other idiots who I'll tell you about at some point if the right moment ever presents itself. A pause. You look like him. You have his hair and his face and his hands. Your eyes are your mother's. I know, Harry said. Does that bother you, people saying it? Harry thought about it. Only when they say it like I'm supposed to be him, when they say it like they're describing where I come from, it's no, that's just true. Lupin looked at him for a long moment, and the assessment in it was warm rather than measuring. Extra lessons, Tuesday evenings, 7 o'clock. Bring your wand and whatever level of focus you've got available. I'll bring my full focus, Harry said. It's 7 in the evening. Not a morning person, Lupin said with the faint precision of someone who has already figured this out from observation. Salazar has been exploiting that since I was 9, Harry said. Lupin went slightly still at the name, in the way people went still when they heard it said casually and needed a moment to reconcile it with reality. Then he said carefully, the Founders are, the way it was described to me years ago, I imagined something more formal. Their family, Harry said simply. Complicated, occasionally infuriating, fully 3-dimensional family. Salazar is teaching me occlumency and Hermione to play chess. Godric is teaching me to be reckless in ways that are actually calculated. Rowena is teaching us everything she knows and being somewhat annoyed that there's a limited supply of her. And Helga is the one who makes everything survivable. He paused. They're not legends, they're people. They have bad days and strong opinions, and Godric has been telling the same story about his horse for 9 years, and none of us have told him to stop. Lupin looked at him with an expression that was, underneath everything, a kind of uncomplicated wonder. You are going to be remarkable, he said. I already am, Harry said, pleasantly. No offense. Salazar told me false modesty is just arrogance wearing an apology. Lupin laughed, a real laugh, brief and surprised, and said, Tuesday at 7, don't be late. The patroness came on the 4th lesson. Not perfectly, not the full corporeal form, not yet, but real and solid, a shape in the silver mist that had mass and direction and the specific quality of warmth that a true patroness carried. Lupin stood back and watched it with the expression of a man who has been practicing this craft for 20 years and still finds it extraordinary when it works. What's the memory? Lupin asked. Harry lowered his wand. He was slightly out of breath. The charm took more out of him than most things, not because of magical cost, but because of the specific quality of what it demanded. You couldn't borrow the emotion, you couldn't approximate it. You had to be inside it completely and wholly, not thinking about whether it was working, but simply in it. The first Christmas, Harry said, here at Hogwarts. The 4 of them were all in the sitting room, and Godric's story had been going for 3 hours, and Helga kept trying to stop him, and Salazar kept making increasingly cutting remarks about the narrative structure, and Rowena had given up and was reading in the corner and pretending she wasn't listening. And I was 8 and sitting on the hearthrug, and I thought, he stopped. What did you think? Lupin asked quietly. I thought, this is mine, these people are mine. Whatever happens, this is real and it's mine and no one can take it. He looked at his wand. That's the memory. Lupin said nothing for a moment. Then next week we work on making it corporeal. I want to know what form it takes. Do you know what form you'd expect? I have a guess, Lupin said with something that might have been a smile. But patronesses have their own opinions about this. We let it decide. The patroness, when it came fully formed 2 weeks later, was a stag. Harry looked at it, silver and solid, moving around the practice room with the unhurried certainty of something that knew its own nature completely, and felt the specific quality of being surprised by something that was also exactly right. Lupin looked at the stag with an expression that was the most openly emotional Harry had ever seen on him, which wasn't saying much but was saying something. Your father's animagus form, he said. I know, Harry said. He watched the stag walk through the wall and dissolve. Helga told me. You knew. She told me when I was 9. She said, he thought about how to phrase it. She said the dead we love don't leave. They become part of what we're made of. He paused. I think that's what a patroness is, not just a happy memory, everything you're made of given a shape. Lupin looked at him for a long moment. Your father would have been so proud, he said. I know that too, Harry said gently. But thank you for saying it. The truth about Sirius Black arrived on a night in May that was warm and overcast, when the moon was full behind clouds and the whooping willow was still. They found him in the shrieking shack, Harry and Hermione and Ron, who had followed a large black dog through a passage under the willow roots that Ron identified as one of the Marauders' tunnels before any of them had to explain anything, because Ron had the kind of magical map knowledge that came from years of older siblings and comprehensive eavesdropping. The man waiting in the shack was exactly and nothing like what Harry had expected. Sirius Black was thin and hollowed in the way that years in Azkaban hollowed people, not just physically but in some fundamental quality, as though the Dementors had consumed some of the surface material and left the structural core standing, and the structural core was something considerable. He had a face that had been good-looking before it became what it was now, too spare, too worn, but with the architecture of something that had been laughing before the laughter was taken away and was trying to remember how to get it back. He looked at Harry with an expression that had too many things in it to separate out. I'm not here to hurt you, he said. His voice was the voice of someone who has not spoken to another human being in any meaningful way for 12 years, and is finding language slightly strange in his mouth. I know that's what everyone will have told you. No one told me anything useful, Harry said. The official record says you betrayed my parents and killed 13 people and laughed about it. Godric told me the official record is wrong. Sirius went still. Godric Gryffindor told you, he's been my guardian since I was a baby, Harry said. Along with the other 3 founders, he told me you were a Gryffindor's Gryffindor and that he didn't believe the accusation. He watched Sirius process this with the liar's caught attention, reading the exact quality of the man's shock. He was right, wasn't he? It wasn't a question. It was Pettigrew, Sirius said. The name came out with the specific texture of something a person has been saying in their head every day for 12 years. Peter Pettigrew, he was the secret keeper. We switched, James and I switched last minute because I thought it would be safer if I weren't the obvious choice. If Voldemort came for the secret keeper, it would be me. If it wasn't actually me, he stopped. Peter was the spy. He gave them to Voldemort. And then when it was done, he blew up the street himself and cut off his own finger to fake his death and became, he looked at Ron with an expression that Ron didn't understand yet, became a rat. He's been a rat for 12 years. Harry heard this. He did not perform hearing it. He simply sat with the full weight of it. His parents had died because of a man who was currently pretending to be an animal in this school, in this castle, within reach. Where is he? Harry asked. Ron said very slowly. You don't mean your rat, Harry said. Scabbers, how long have you had him? Ron's face did something complicated and arrived at an expression that was processing several things at once, and he looked at Scabbers, who was tucked in his pocket and looking extremely ordinary, and then he looked at Harry and then at Sirius, and then he took Scabbers out of his pocket very carefully and held him at arm's length. Sirius produced his wand. The transformation was unpleasant to watch, and Peter Pettigrew standing in the shack was even more unpleasant. A small man with the physical expression of someone who has been a coward for so long it had become his structural state. He looked at Harry, he looked at Sirius. "Harry," he said with the specific quality of a man about to deploy someone else's grief as a weapon. "Your father, don't," Harry said. It came out very quiet and very absolute, and Pettigrew stopped mid-syllable. "I know exactly what you did," Harry said, "and I know what you were to my father, and I know that makes it worse, not better. Don't use his name." He looked at Sirius. "We need to get him out of the castle to the ministry with witnesses." "Lupin's outside," Sirius said. He'd been watching Harry with the expression he'd had from the beginning, the one with too many things in it. "He came in through the passage after you. He'll be—" The clouds outside broke. The moon came through the window, full and bare and enormous. Lupin, Harry understood in the next 3 seconds, was a werewolf. This was not, in the scheme of the evening's revelations, the most shocking development. It was, however, immediately the most urgent one, because werewolf transformation was not something you waited out in a small room, and Lupin's expression as the light hit him was the expression of a man who has been dreading this exact moment and is now inside it and has run out of time. He transformed, not pleasantly. The wolf that stood in the room was nothing like the man. Harry moved without deciding to move. He was between the wolf and Hermione before he'd consciously processed the direction, wand up, the specific calculation running in parallel with everything else. Werewolf, not aggressive yet disoriented. "The moon is full and there's no potion and we are in an enclosed space and I know you're in there," he said in a calm, carrying voice directed at the wolf. "I know you're in there, Lupin. Come back to us." The wolf looked at him. Werewolves didn't think the way humans thought, didn't respond to language the way humans responded. Harry knew this theory cold. But he also knew something Rowena had told him about magical creatures and the people they were bonded to. The human self didn't disappear during transformation. It was buried, but it was there, and certain specific stimuli could reach it. He pushed with his legilimency lightly, just a touch, not reading, not invading, just knocking, saying, "I'm here." "You're here, you're Lupin." The wolf took a step back. It wasn't enough. The moon was up and the transformation was full, and the wolf's instincts were louder than anything Harry was doing with an 11-year-old's legilimency, and it turned and it ran through the wall, through the shack, out into the grounds, and Sirius went after it in his dog form because apparently that was the other piece of this evening's revelations, and there was genuinely no point being surprised anymore. Peter Pettigrew had the 3 seconds of confusion that created, and he took them. He transformed and ran, and was gone through a hole in the floorboards before any of them had gotten their wands up. And the absence of him in the room was both relief and catastrophe simultaneously. Hermione looked at Harry. Her hair was wild and there was a cut on her chin from when she'd hit the floor during the transformation chaos, and she was angry in the specific controlled way she got when a plan had gone wrong through factors outside their control. "He's gone," she said. "I know. Pettigrew is gone and Sirius is outside with a werewolf, and we have," she checked her watch, "considerably less time than we had an hour ago." "Sirius can prove his own innocence with Veritaserum," Harry said. "If we can get him in front of the ministry before Dumbledore's hands are tied by." The sound from outside was enormous. They went to the window. Sirius, in dog form, had kept the wolf from the castle. They were at the edge of the lake, and the wolf was retreating. The moon was behind a cloud again, which wasn't enough to reverse the transformation, but was enough to reduce the instinct noise, and Sirius was circling the wolf in the specific way that dogs circle things they're trying to herd without threatening. Then the Dementors arrived. They came over the edge of the grounds in a cloud, not one, not several, an enormous mass of them, drawn to the panic and the magic and the specific quality of distress that the shack and its recent events had generated. Harry watched them come and felt the cold move through him, and heard his mother's voice begin at the edge of his perception, and he looked at Sirius in his dog form collapsing under the onslaught of more Dementors than any dog form could hold against. He came out of the shrieking shack at a run. Harry, Hermione behind him. "I know," he said. He ran to the lake's edge to where Sirius was on the ground and the Dementors were descending and the air had gone so cold that each breath hurt. He pointed his wand at the sky. He found the memory, the sitting room, the fire. All 4 of them, and Godric's voice and Helga's warmth and Rowena's sharp attention and Salazar, turned slightly away from the light with what Harry had understood even at 8 was an expression of contentment that Salazar hadn't known what to do with. "This is mine. These people are mine. Expcitopatrnum. The stag came out of his wand like something that had been there all along, waiting to be released. It wasn't the practice room stag. It was larger than the practice room stag, brighter, and it moved into the cloud of Dementors with the absolute certainty of something that knows its own power and doesn't need to prove it. The Dementors scattered. The warmth came back. Sirius on the ground opened his eyes. He looked at the stag, at Harry, at the stag again. "James," he whispered, then clearing. No, that's not Harry," Harry said, kneeling beside him. "Sirius, can you stand?" The resemblance is Sirius stopped, sat up. His face had the expression of a man who has been hit by several things at once and is reordering them into priority. The ministry. They're going to, I know, we need to move. They did not get to the ministry in time. Dumbledore got there first, or rather the ministry got to Dumbledore first, or rather the whole thing collapsed in the specific way that things collapse when bureaucracy moves faster than truth, and Sirius was recaptured before any of them could produce the evidence that wasn't there anymore because Pettigrew had run. The Dementor's kiss was scheduled. Harry stood in the hospital wing with Hermione while Dumbledore told them this, and felt the specific frustration of a situation that had the right answer and the wrong administrative outcome, and he looked at Dumbledore with the expression he'd been developing for 2 years now, the one that was not quite trust and not quite its opposite, but was instead a careful and ongoing assessment. "There's a way," Dumbledore said. He was looking at them both, and the calculation in his expression was unusually transparent. "I can't tell you what it is because I can't be seen to sanction it, but I will say that time is a dimension like any other, and that Hermione's time-turner," he glanced at her with the precision of a man who has known about the time-turner since he approved the arrangement in September, and has been waiting for exactly this moment, "has more applications than simply attending additional classes." He left. Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione reached under her robes and produced the time-turner with the expression of someone who has been doing extra classes with it for 8 months and has, in fact, thought about its other applications. 3 turns, she said. "That takes us back 3 hours. We need to free Sirius before the ministry arrives, which means we need the hippogriff. Buckbeak is in Hagrid's cabin under sentence of execution," Harry said. "If we bring him forward, Sirius can fly out." She was already working the chain of the turner around both their necks. "The execution is at sunset. We have until sunset, and we can't interact with our past selves or change anything that already happened," she said, "in the causal sequence. We adjust the things that were undetermined. Sirius escaping was undetermined. No one witnessed him leave. Buckbeak's execution was undetermined. Hagrid was inside with us. The executioner was with the committee. No one saw the actual." She stopped. "The axe didn't hit anything," Harry said, a memory shifting. "There was a sound. We heard it from outside, but we didn't see it." She looked at him. He looked at her. 3 turns. They came out of time 3 hours earlier, behind the herbology greenhouses, and the evening was still young and warm and full of the specific golden light of a May evening that was about to become the best and worst of its type, and they moved through it quickly, keeping to the edges of things. And Harry watched himself and Hermione and Ron enter the castle from across the grounds and felt the specific philosophical vertigo of being in 2 places in the same moment and choosing not to think about it too hard. They got to Buckbeak. The committee had left him staked in front of Hagrid's cabin, and Buckbeak regarded Harry with the amber dignity of a creature that has decided not to be alarmed by this, and then consented to be led when Harry bowed and Buckbeak returned it with the formal precision of a hippogriff that has always known his own worth. They had him untied and moving through the trees when the committee emerged from the cabin with the executioner, and the executioner raised his axe and brought it down on the empty stake, and the sound it made was the sound they'd heard from 3 hours in the future, and Harry filed away the sensation of understanding a paradox from the inside. The tower where Sirius was being held was accessible from the astronomy tower's outer stairs. They brought Buckbeak. Window was barred, but Alohomora and some creative wandwork with the bar mechanism, and Sirius came through the window with the careful deliberateness of a man who has learned not to trust the good things until they're real. He saw Buckbeak and something happened in his face that was the structural precursor to the expression he'd been unable to feel properly for 12 years. "You have 10 minutes before the ministry arrives," Hermione said. "Buckbeak can carry you both. He'll go where you direct him." Sirius looked at Harry. There was too much in the look to address in 10 minutes. They both knew it. "North," Harry said. "Go north. Wait until we can fix this properly. I'll find you." A pause. "I already know you're innocent. I know the truth of it. That's not going away." Sirius reached out and gripped Harry's shoulder with one hand, just for a moment, just long enough for it to be real, and then he was on Buckbeak's back and the hippogriff was running and then airborne, climbing into the last of the evening light, carrying a man who had been in a cage for 12 years toward the first open sky he'd had in all of them. Harry watched him go. Hermione stood beside him. "We need to get back before we are seen." "I know." He didn't move yet. She waited. "He grabbed my shoulder," Harry said. "It wasn't meant to be significant. It just came out." "I know," she said softly. "He looked at me like James," she said. "Like James and like you both." He nodded, looked at the sky where Buckbeak was now a dark shape and then nothing. "Salazar's going to say we were reckless." "We were efficient," Hermione said. "Reckless would have been doing it without the plan." "Godric's going to say we were glorious." "Godric says everything is glorious." "Helga's going to cry." "Helga's going to be relieved and call it something practical." "Rowena's going to want a full debrief." "Rowena's going to say she's very pleased with our execution of temporal mechanics," Hermione said, "and mean that she loves us, but that's too simple." Harry finally looked away from the sky. He smiled, and it was small and genuine and had nothing performed in it. "Let's go in." Fourth year arrived in September with the announcement of the Triwizard Tournament, and the specific quality of excitement that takes over a school when something genuinely unprecedented has happened. Harry heard it, and his first thought was logistical. His second thought was Hermione's voice in his head saying age restriction before she said it out loud across the breakfast table. His third thought was that the tournament being at Hogwarts with representatives from foreign schools, with a series of dangerous tasks designed to test the most capable adult wizards of 3 nations, was exactly the kind of large-scale organized event that someone with an ongoing resurrection agenda would find extremely useful. He said this to Hermione. "I know," she said. "I've been thinking about it since Dumbledore finished the sentence. They were 14. The age restriction was 17. This was, theoretically, not their problem. Victor Krum arrived with the Durmstrang delegation in October and was immediately recognizable even before introduction, because Victor Krum was the most famous Quidditch player of his generation, and even people who didn't follow Quidditch professionally knew his face. He was large and deliberate in his movements, with the specific quality of someone who spends most of his life being observed and has learned to be comfortable in that observation without enjoying it. He sat at the Slytherin table for the welcome feast, looked across the hall with a sweeping assessment, and his gaze landed on Hermione and stayed there for approximately 4 seconds before moving on. Harry noticed. He noted it, added it to the ongoing catalogue, and said nothing. The champions were selected on Halloween night, and the Goblet of Fire produced 3 names: Cedric Diggory for Hogwarts, Fleur de Lacquer for Beauxbatons, Victor Krum for Durmstrang. The tournament was closed. The goblet went dark, then it flared again. One more name: Harry Potter. The hall went quiet in the specific way it had learned to go quiet around things involving Harry, and Harry sat at the Gryffindor table and looked at the ceiling and processed several things simultaneously. First, someone had entered his name, which required circumventing both the age line and the protective enchantments around the goblet, which meant someone with significant magical capability. Second, the tournament contract was binding under magical law, which meant participation was not optional regardless of age restriction. Third, this was a move in a game he'd been tracking for 2 years, and the endgame was accelerating. He looked at Hermione. "Someone entered your name," she said. "Yes," deliberately, knowing what the tournament involves. "Yes, someone wants you in the tasks. Wants you specifically in the final task, presumably the one at the end of the tournament, whatever it is, because they need something at the end." She was very still, thinking. A portkey, the trophy or the maze or whatever the final element is. If someone could turn it into a portkey, and if you were guaranteed to be the one to reach it first, they'd know exactly where I'd end up, Harry said. "The resurrection ritual," she said. "The one Voldemort's been working toward since he had a body to work toward things with. He needs a body, he needs a ritual, and the ritual requires—" She stopped. "My blood," Harry said. The information was 4 years old from a research session with Rowena that had covered the specific mechanics of the ritual Voldemort had been theorized to be working toward. The blood of the enemy he couldn't kill, to take the protection and incorporate it, to be able to move through my mother's sacrifice. Hermione looked at him. The look was not frightened, it was assessing. "It's Moody," Harry said, "or whoever's pretending to be Moody, the new defense teacher. Watch his patterns. He's been steering me since term started." He'd noticed it gradually, the specific quality of attention from Alastor Moody that was slightly different from the attention of a teacher, the small moments of guidance that had the texture of preparation rather than instruction. "He's been making sure I'm ready for the tasks. He needs me to win." Hermione looked at him. "Are you going to tell Dumbledore?" "I'm going to tell the Founders first," Harry said. "Then we decide together what to tell Dumbledore and when." That evening in the sitting room, all 4 of them listened. Salazar was the one who said at the end, "You compete." "I know," Harry said. "You compete and you win, because winning is the mechanism that puts you in the final position. And you stay alert through every task, and you don't go to that final position alone. I can't bring someone into the maze with me. The rules, Salazar said, are being used against you by the person who entered your name. You are not obligated to be defeated by the weapons your enemy has chosen." He looked at Harry steadily. "Hermione cannot be a co-champion. She can be something else." Hermione understood first. "The maze will have a defined perimeter," she said. "If someone were positioned at the boundary, with the right spells," Harry said, "you could track me through the boundary, stay in contact. Not physically inside the maze, but aware of my position," he said. "So that if the trophy is a portkey and I touch it, you won't be alone when you arrive," she said. "We've had this conversation before," Harry said. "The phrasing is different, but we've had it. We always end up here," she said simply. "So let's plan properly." The tasks went as they went. The first task was dragons, a Hungarian horntail for Harry, which he handled by flying because flying was the most natural thing he did, and a dragon, however enormous, was still a creature with predictable instincts if you were fast enough and smart enough and paying attention. He got the golden egg in 4 minutes. Krum was second at 6. Cedric was third. Fleur was fourth with minor fire damage that she repaired with a calm that impressed Harry considerably. Krum found Hermione between the first and second tasks. He came to her in the library, directly, without social architecture, which Harry found respectable, and said that he'd heard she was the one who'd worked out the clue in the first task before anyone else, and he wanted to know how. Hermione told him. He told him completely and accurately and without softening the methodology, which was always her way, and Crumb listened with the focused attention of someone who is genuinely interested rather than socially navigating. "You are not in the tournament," he said. "No, you should be." He said it flatly as though stating something obvious. "You are better at this than most of the champions." "I'm aware," Hermione said. He looked at her for a moment. "Would you like to come to the library again on Thursday?" "I'm always in the library on Thursday," she said. "Yes," he said, "I know." Harry, returning a book 3 shelves away, made no comment. He stored the information, felt something adjacent to amusement, and moved on. The second task was the lake. Harry went into it with gillyweed, sourced, refined, and correctly prepared by Hermione, who had spent 3 weeks on the calculation, and whose version was 20% more effective than the commercial preparation, and retrieved Ron from the lake floor in the specific efficient style of someone who'd been told the plan and executed it cleanly. He came second over the line because he waited for Fleur's hostage as well as his own, which the judges scored as exemplary moral fiber, and which Harry had done simply because leaving someone on the lake floor had not been an option he'd been willing to take. The third task was the maze, and the maze was where it stopped being a tournament. Harry went in with his wand and Hermione's tracking charm on the inside of his wrist, a small spelled mark that felt warm when she was monitoring it and would spike hot if he touched it, which was the signal they'd agreed on for danger. He moved through the maze with the specific efficient precision of someone who has been thinking about this for months. No unnecessary movement, senses fully extended, Parseltongue useful once when a large serpentine creature resolved itself from the shadows and Harry told it politely but firmly that he'd prefer it move aside. It moved aside. He found Cedric at the center before the trophy, and Cedric was in good shape, and they looked at each other in the specific way of two people who are both smart enough to understand the same thing simultaneously. "Something's wrong," Cedric said. "I know," Harry said. "The trophy, don't touch it yet." Cedric looked at him. It was a Hufflepuff, loyal, fair, deeply decent in the structural way of someone whose decency was load-bearing rather than performed, and he held Harry's gaze with the specific quality of trust that people offered Harry when they'd been around him long enough to understand that his instincts had good foundations. "What are we doing?" Cedric asked. "We're not touching the trophy alone," Harry said. He pressed his wrist, the tracking signal, 2 sharp pulses, and felt it spike warm in confirmation. Hermione was there, she knew. He looked at the trophy. The portkey was real. He could feel it from 6 feet away, the specific magical signature of a triggered transport object, the contained potential of something wound up and waiting. Whoever had set it had done an extraordinarily clean job. "If we both touch it," Cedric said slowly, "we both go." "Yes, and you know where it goes." "I have a strong guess." Cedric looked at the trophy, at Harry. "Your guess is better than most people's certainties." "Probably," Harry agreed. "Are you asking me to come with you?" Harry looked at him. Cedric Diggory was 17 and the genuine Hogwarts champion, and had not signed up for whatever was at the other end of a dark portkey in a rigged tournament. He had every right to step back, every right in the world. "No," Harry said, "I'm not asking. What I'm going to do is touch this trophy and go wherever it goes, because whatever's there is going to happen whether I go willingly or not. You don't have to come. You should probably not come." "Right," Cedric said. He grabbed the other handle of the trophy. Harry looked at him. "Cedric, you said you're not asking," Cedric said. "You didn't tell me to let go." They went together. The graveyard came up around them, dark and cold and very quiet, with the quality of a place that has been waiting, and a man in black said, "Kill the spare," and Harry had already moved, already casting the shield charm he'd been holding for this specific moment, the one Salazar had been drilling with him since the summer, on the premise that the first spell in an ambush situation was always directed at the least prepared target. The spell hit the shield. Cedric stumbled but stayed standing. Harry turned to find the source. Peter Pettigrew, of course. A small man who looked at Harry with the specific quality of someone who is very frightened of the work they're being asked to do and is doing it anyway because they are more frightened of the person asking. He had a bundle in his arms, a small, terrible, wrong thing, barely more than a shape that radiated cold malevolence the way a wound radiates heat. "You," Harry said, not to Pettigrew, to the thing. The thing that would become Voldemort looked at him and said, "The boy." The ritual that followed was not something Harry could stop. It had too much momentum, and Pettigrew had the wand, and the cauldron was already active, and the graveyard contained too many parameters that were moving simultaneously for any single intervention to disrupt all of them at once. Harry was caught by the statue, and his blood was taken, and he watched Voldemort rise from the cauldron with the cold fury of someone watching an event they've been preparing against finally happen. Voldemort stood fully formed for the first time in 13 years, and he looked at Harry, and there was a moment, a long one, in which he seemed to simply take in the fact of Harry's existence. Alive, present, not terrified. "You're not afraid of me," Voldemort said. "No," Harry said, "you should be. You've been taught not to be, and that teaching is going to kill you." "You've been saying variations of that for 3 years," Harry said. "It hasn't been accurate so far." Voldemort looked at him with the specific expression of a person who expected to face a child and is facing something that doesn't fit the category. He raised his wand. What followed was a duel, and it was not an equal one in terms of raw power. Voldemort had 13 years of desperation behind every spell and a body built specifically for this moment, and Harry had his training and his wand, and the specific terrifying calm of someone who has been thinking about this conversation for 4 years. He didn't beat Voldemort in the graveyard. He wasn't supposed to, the conditions weren't right, the variables weren't aligned, and more importantly Cedric was there, and Cedric being there meant the first priority was getting them both out. The priori incantatum connection happened because their wands shared a core and nobody had accounted for that in the plan, least of all Harry, and when the golden thread connected them and the echo of his parents came out of Voldemort's wand, Harry felt something he couldn't fully describe, the weight of it, the reality of them there present more than ghost or portrait or memory. His mother's voice said, "When the connection breaks, run. The portkey is behind you, take Cedric." He broke the connection. He ran, he grabbed Cedric by the arm and he grabbed the portkey and the graveyard dissolved and they came back onto the Hogwarts lawn in a heap, and the maze was still burning at its edges from where a rogue spell had caught the hedges, and Hermione was there before anyone else was there because she had been at the boundary and she had felt the signal and she had run. She dropped to her knees beside him and said nothing. She just put her hand on his shoulder and he put his hand over hers and held on, and that was enough. Cedric, who had come through the portkey and landed 3 feet away and was sitting up and looking at the burning maze and at the crowd that was beginning to emerge from the castle, said, "I don't understand most of what just happened." "I'll explain later," Harry said. "Is it?" Cedric looked at him. "Is it finished?" "No," Harry said. He looked at the sky. At the castle, standing enormous and warm against it, every window lit. "It's starting." Hermione's hand tightened on his shoulder. He tightened his hand over hers. The war was real now. Voldemort was back in a body, and the Ministry was going to spend a year refusing to believe it, and Dumbledore was going to do several things Harry agreed with, and several things he didn't, and the world was going to get significantly worse before it got better. And Harry sat on the Hogwarts lawn at the end of his 4th year and looked at all of that clearly and without flinching. Not because he wasn't afraid, because he'd been raised by people who had taught him what fear was for. It was information, and he knew exactly what to do with information. Chapter 6. What the dead remember. The years between the graveyard and the war were not quiet years. They were years of the Ministry calling Harry a liar in print every other week, of Umbridge arriving in 5th year like a bureaucratic infection wearing pink, of Dumbledore's army meeting in the room of requirement on Thursday evenings, with the focused clandestine energy of people who have decided that preparation is its own form of resistance. They were years of the Order of the Phoenix and the Department of Mysteries and Sirius, finally free in the way that mattered most, known to Harry, known to be innocent, living in Grimmauld Place with the particular restless energy of a man relearning how to be alive. They were years of OWLS and NEWTS and the steady accumulation of skill and knowledge and loss, because loss was also part of the years, woven through everything the way dark thread runs through bright cloth. Sirius died in the Department of Mysteries on a night in May when Harry was 15. He fell through the veil with the specific casual suddenness of things that change everything, one moment there, the next not. And the not there was so absolute that it took several seconds for Harry to understand what he was seeing. Bellatrix Lestrange's curse and Sirius's own reckless momentum, and the veil doing what the veil did, and then nothing. Harry stood at the edge of the archway and felt something he'd never felt before, not grief exactly, not yet, because grief needed time to settle into shape, but something rawer and more immediate. The specific fury of a person who has lost something they'd barely gotten to have. Hermione found him at the edge of the archway and didn't try to pull him back or say the wrong thing. She just stood beside him and let the moment be what it was, and eventually he turned away from the veil because that was the only thing there was left to do. The night drive back was silent. The order was there. Dumbledore arrived with the specific weight of a man who has failed to prevent something he knew was coming, and Harry looked at him and said nothing because nothing was accurate and everything was less accurate than that. At Hogwarts, very late, Harry went to the sitting room. He didn't say anything when he came in. He sat down on the hearthrug the way he'd sat on it since he was old enough to sit by himself in the corner near the fire, and he put his back against the stone of the fireplace surround, and he looked at his hands for a while. One by one they came. Helga first in her portrait, sitting in the painted herb garden with the unhurried quality she had when she was letting someone find their own way to a thing before she reached toward it. Godric next, arriving with less noise than usual, which was how you knew he understood the situation. Rowena in the frame near the window with a book that she wasn't reading. Salazar in the dark frame, arms at his sides instead of crossed. The fire burned. The castle breathed. Harry said, "I didn't get enough time with him." "No," Helga said, "you didn't. He was supposed to be." Harry stopped. He was not a person who said sentences he hadn't finished building, but this one wasn't built yet and he said it anyway. He was supposed to be there for the other side of this, when it was done. "Yes," Helga said, "that's not." He stopped again. "It's not fair," Godric said very quietly in the voice that was left when you removed the drama and the performance and the armor of theatrical courage, which was the voice that Harry had heard exactly 3 times in his life and which was, he'd always thought, Godric's truest voice. It's not fair and there's no argument that makes it fair. He deserved more years. You deserved more time with him. Both things are true and neither of them makes this better. Harry looked at the fire. Rowena said, grief is not a thing to solve. I know that instinct in you, the instinct to find the framework that contains it and understand it correctly so it hurts less. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't go away faster because you understand it. It goes away at its own pace and the only thing you can do is let it. I know, Harry said. I know you know, she said. I'm telling you anyway. Salazar said nothing for a long time then. He knew you in the time he had. He knew who you actually were, not the legend of you, and he was glad of it. That's not sufficient, but it's not nothing. Harry sat with that, with all of it. The fire went through its stages and the castle settled around them, and eventually he put his head back against the stone and looked at the ceiling, and after a while the rawness shifted into something that was still grief, but was grief with slightly more room around it to breathe. Okay, he said finally, not meaning it was okay. Meaning I'm here, I'm still here. Okay, Helga said simply. 6th year brought the Horcruxes. Dumbledore had been collecting information for years, longer than Harry had known, longer than anyone had known except Dumbledore, and he came to Harry in September with the memory basin and the specific quality of a man who has decided that secrets are no longer serving the purpose they were meant to serve. He showed Harry the memories. He explained the framework that Harry and Hermione had been building for 4 years. You know most of this, Dumbledore said at the end. We know the theory, Harry said. We've been working on the specific instances since 2nd year. Dumbledore looked at him. We, Hermione and I, with Rowena's theoretical framework and Salazar's dark magic knowledge. He held Dumbledore's gaze steadily. We know about the diary destroyed. We have a framework for the others based on the objects Voldemort would have chosen. Significant, meaningful to him specifically, things he could access through his gaunt heritage and his Death Eater period. We have a list of 6 candidates. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Tell me the list, Harry told him. Dumbledore listened, and the expression that moved across his face was the one that Harry had come to understand best across 6 years of increasingly direct dealings. The expression of a man who is being shown that his calculations were correct but that he had arrived at them late, and who is deciding whether to be affronted or grateful. He decided, apparently, on grateful. You are 6 steps ahead of where I expected you to be. We've had better resources than you knew about, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. He looked at his blackened hand, the ring's curse, which had been killing him since summer and which he'd told Harry about with a frankness that Harry recognized as a man putting his affairs in order. I have 1 year, possibly less. We need to find as many as possible before he stopped. Before Snape kills you, Harry said. Another pause. You know about that too. Salazar told me in August, Harry said. After you came back from the cave with the ring. Snape is going to kill you because you've asked him to, because the Malfoy boy is going to be given that task and he won't be able to carry it through, and you'd rather die on your terms than on Draco's failure. He looked at Dumbledore directly. I'm not going to pretend I'm not angry about it. I am, but I understand the logic. You understand, it keeps Snape's cover, Harry said. It protects Draco from completing a murder. It gives Snape the position he needs at Voldemort's side for the rest of the war. He paused. And it's what you want. You're tired, Dumbledore. You've been carrying this for 50 years and you're ready to put it down, and you've arranged for it to be put down in a way that does the most work on the way out. He held the old man's gaze. I think you deserve to make that choice. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, quiet moment. You are more forgiving than I deserve, he said. I'm accurate, Harry said. It's not the same thing. Something moved across Dumbledore's face that was as close as Harry had ever seen, the thing behind all his other expressions. Old and human and genuinely moved. Your parents would have been proud, yes, Harry said. You've said I believe you. A pause, and then, because it was true and deserved to be said, you made mistakes with me, significant ones. But you loved this school and the people in it, and everything you did came from that, even when the method was wrong. I want you to know I understand the difference. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, Harry, he said simply. Draco Malfoy came to Harry in October. He came to the sitting room. Harry had expected this for 2 weeks, had known it was coming with the specific certainty of someone who has been watching a person approach a decision from a long way off and can see the moment they arrive at it. Draco came in without knocking, which was actually the most telling thing about the visit, because it meant he was past the point of social performance and into the point of needing something real. He looked at the portrait frames, all 4 of them. He looked at Salazar's frame specifically, and the portrait of Salazar looked back at him with the complex expression of a man who has been watching this particular young person for 4 years, and is not sure whether to be moved by how far he's come or ashamed of how far he had to come. I can't do it, Draco said. He said it to the room, not specifically to Harry, the way people say things that are too large to direct at a single person. Harry said nothing. He gave me the task in June, Draco said. The Dark Lord killed Dumbledore or he kills my parents. My father's already in Azkaban and my mother. He stopped. His voice had the quality it had when he was 12 and the map of the world was cracking, but older now and the crack was in a more fundamental place. I've been trying to find a way to do it and I can't, not because I'm not capable. Because, he looked at Harry, because I've been in this castle for 6 years and I've been reading about him, a gesture at Salazar's frame, and I've been watching you and Granger and I can't make the picture that I was given fit the picture that's actually here. And I cannot, his voice broke on it briefly, and he held it back with the effort of a person who considers breaking down a form of defeat. I cannot be what he wants me to be. Harry looked at him. Sit down, Harry said. Draco sat. I know about the task, Harry said. I've known since August, we've made arrangements. He watched Draco's face absorb that. Dumbledore dies at the end of this year. He's already dying, the curse from the ring. Snape finishes it on Dumbledore's request in a way that keeps Snape's cover and protects you from completing the murder. He paused. You're not going to have to kill anyone, Draco. Draco looked at him with the specific expression of someone receiving news they'd stopped believing they were allowed to receive. Your mother, Harry said, is she willing to leave? Draco stopped. She's not a Death Eater, she never was. She married into it and then she was inside it and there was no way out. His jaw was tight. She'd leave if she could leave without. If my father, your father made his choices, Harry said, not cruelly, just clearly. Your mother can make hers. When this is over, when we get to the other side of this, there are people I know who can help her. He glanced at the portrait frames. There are resources here that most people don't know about. Salazar in the dark frame said, your mother is a Black before she's a Malfoy. She has intelligence and she has survival instincts and she has been keeping you and herself alive inside a situation that would have broken lesser people for 15 years. He looked at Draco directly. She would be proud to know you came here tonight. Draco looked at Salazar for a long moment. The look had something in it that Harry recognized, the specific quality of looking at something you've wanted to look at for a long time and finally allowing yourself the full view. You were wrong, Draco said, not accusatory, almost wondering. The things my father says you believed, you were wrong about them. Yes, Salazar said, and you know that. I've known it for years, Salazar said. It took 2 specific children to make it impossible to not know it. A pause that cost him something. I am sorry for the world that the beliefs I put into this school produced. I am sorry that your father used my worst ideas to build your cage. And I am glad, the word came out with specific deliberate weight, genuinely glad that you are here in this room on this side of this decision. Draco looked at his hands. For a moment he was 12 again and then he wasn't. What do I do? He asked. Stay in position, Harry said. Keep reporting to the Death Eaters that the plan is on track. Keep Snape informed. When the year ends, when Dumbledore, he paused, when it's done, you and your mother come here and you stay here and we move into the next part together. You trust me, Draco said. I've been watching you for 4 years, Harry said. I know exactly what you are and what you're not. Dumbledore died in June on the Astronomy Tower in the way he'd arranged for himself to die. Harry was there. He watched it with the specific quality of grief that came with understanding, not the raw shock of Sirius, but the older, quieter grief of watching something inevitable happen and knowing you accepted it and still feeling the loss of it fully. He went to the sitting room afterward. All 4 of them were already there. Helga said nothing. She looked at him and opened her arms in the gesture she'd been making since he was 3, the portrait frame version of an embrace, which was an entirely symbolic thing that was also entirely real in the ways that mattered, and Harry sat in front of her frame and let himself be there in it, held by the warmth of her attention. Godric said, he was a great man and a complicated one and the world is less interesting without him. Rowena said, he trusted you in the end, fully. He gave you everything he had. Salazar said nothing for a while. Then, he loved the school, whatever else he was. He loved this school the way we love it, which is the deepest thing I know how to say about a person. Harry sat with that. Then he said, we have 4 Horcruxes left, and they went to work. The year between Dumbledore's death and the Battle of Hogwarts was a year that Harry and Hermione spent largely in motion. Not on the run in the way the public narrative would later describe it, not lost and camping in desperate circumstances, but operating with the focused precision of people with a clear objective and a support network that most people didn't know they had. Salazar's knowledge of dark magic was the foundation. 400 years of studying the worst magic available to wizards, combined with 900 years of watching what those magics did to the people who used them. He understood Horcruxes at a level that the standard literature didn't approach, understood not just the destruction but the detection, the specific magical signature that a soul fragment left on its vessel, the way to confirm a Horcrux without touching it first. Rowena's analytical framework turned the problem into a map. The locket, the cup, the diadem, the snake, 4 remaining. The locket in Grimmauld Place through Mundungus Fletcher and then Dolores Umbridge. The cup in Gringotts' vault of the Lestrange family, which required the most planning of any of them. The diadem in the Room of Requirement, which Harry and Hermione had known about since 3rd year. Rowena had told them about the diadem in a conversation about loss that had started about something else entirely, and the mention of its location had stayed in Harry's memory with the specific retention of things that feel important before you know why. The snake, Voldemort's familiar, the living Horcrux, the one that would require the last confrontation. Godric contributed something that none of the others could have provided, the specific knowledge of what it felt like to carry something that was slowly wearing you down and do it anyway. He had carried the weight of his legacy, the war with Salazar, the school's fracturing, the history of everything he'd built and broken, for 9 centuries without putting it down. He understood endurance in the particular way of someone who'd had no alternative to it. When Harry came to the sitting room in the small hours with the specific exhaustion of a person fighting a war inside themselves as much as outside, It was Godric who sat with him and talked about endurance until something settled. The weight doesn't get lighter, Godric told him once in November when they were deep in the planning and Harry was carrying the knowledge of the soul fragment in his own scar with the accumulated pressure of 6 years of knowing it. It stays the same weight. You get stronger. That's not a comfort exactly, it's just what's true. It helps, Harry said. Somehow. Good, Godric said. Now tell me your plan for the Gringotts vault because the plan you have currently has a structural problem in the 3rd stage and I've been waiting for you to see it yourself and you're taking too long. Harry laughed, which was the other thing Godric was for. They took the Horcruxes one by one. The locket, Umbridge had it. Getting it back required infiltrating the Ministry with Polyjuice Potion, which Hermione planned with the precision of someone who finds elaborate deception intellectually satisfying, and navigating a ministry that had become something unrecognizable, Muggle-born registration committees and propaganda in the corridors, and the specific terrible quality of an institution that has been converted to cruelty. They came out with the locket and 2 other people they hadn't planned to bring, because leaving people in that building had not been an option Harry was willing to take. The locket died on a night in December in a forest, to the sword of Gryffindor, and the sound it made when it broke was the sound of something that should never have been made admitting that it shouldn't have been made. The cup was Gringotts, which was the hardest of the operations, a bank designed specifically to be impenetrable, with the added complication that the vault required Bellatrix Lestrange's identity, which required Hermione to be Bellatrix, which was the worst Polyjuice situation Harry had ever watched, and which Hermione navigated with the tight controlled composure of someone doing something extremely unpleasant, because it's the only way. They came out on a dragon's back, which was not in the plan but which Harry privately felt was the correct energy for the situation, and the cup died to the basilisk fang they'd kept since 2nd year, which felt like appropriate continuity. The diadem, the room of requirement in the fiendfire that Crabbe started and couldn't control, and Harry pulled Draco Malfoy out of the fire because Draco was there and the fire was there and the choice was not a hard one. The diadem died in the fiendfire and they came out without it and with Draco, who was singed and shaking and looked at Harry with an expression that had no words in it and didn't need any. And then there was the snake. And then there was Harry. Rowena told him on the night before the battle. She told him in the direct, complete way she told all difficult things, with the full information and without softening the parts that were hardest, because she had told him since he was 5 that he deserved to understand his own situation. The fragment in you, she said. We've been working on the theory for years, Harry, all of us. There is a way to remove it without dying. I believe I've found it. She paused. I need you to understand that I believe means my confidence is high but not absolute. The mechanism I've identified is theoretically sound and I've verified it through every framework I know, but I've never done this. No one has ever done this. You would be the first. Harry sat across from her frame. The night was very late and the castle was quiet around them and tomorrow was going to be whatever tomorrow was going to be. Tell me, he said. She told him. The mechanism was built on the same principle as Lily Potter's sacrifice, love as a magical force, not metaphor, not symbol, but actual power with actual effects. The soul fragment in Harry was Voldemort's. It persisted because it was anchored to Harry's own life force, a parasitic anchor drawing on Harry's continued existence. To remove it, you needed a force that was stronger than the anchor, a force that the fragment couldn't incorporate, couldn't use, couldn't survive contact with. Willingness, Rowena said, not sacrifice exactly, not death, not necessarily. Willingness, the complete absence of self-preservation in the face of it. Your mother didn't die because she loved you, she died because she was willing to die for you, and that willingness was so total, so without reservation, that it created a protection the killing curse couldn't touch. She looked at him. If you walk into the final confrontation with that same quality, not resigned to death, not seeking it, but genuinely released from fear of it, genuinely willing, the fragment cannot survive the encounter. It needs your survival instinct to anchor itself. Remove the instinct and the anchor dissolves. And if I survive it, then the fragment is gone, she said. You remain, the scar stays, the physical mark, but the magical connection severs. And if I don't survive it, she held his gaze. Then the fragment dies with the body, which is a secondary mechanism, and Voldemort loses his final anchor and the war can be won without you. Harry sat with this for a long time. You've been working on this for years, he said. Since 2nd year when we confirmed the fragment's presence. You could have told me earlier. I could have told you an incomplete theory earlier, she said. I chose to tell you the complete theory when I had it. That was, she paused, that was my version of protecting you. I know you'll disagree with the method. I disagree with the method, he said without heat, but I understand it. A pause. Is it right? Is the theory right? Are you telling me now because it's right and I need to know it for tomorrow, or because you've been carrying it and you needed to put it down? She looked at him. In all the years he'd known her, since he was old enough to have a real conversation, since she'd decided he was interesting enough to teach, he had never seen her look at him with quite this expression. It was the expression of someone who has been caught being human by the person they least expected to see it. Both, she said quietly. He nodded. Okay, Harry, I said okay, he said. I trust your theory, I trust your work. He held her gaze. I trust you. That's not a small thing, and I want to make sure you heard it." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then I heard it. The Battle of Hogwarts began at midnight. It began with the specific catastrophic suddenness of things that have been approaching for years and then are simply there, the barriers falling, the Death Eaters flooding in, the castle's defenses engaging in the way that 900-year-old enchantments engage when they finally get to do what they were made for. The Great Hall became a hospital. The corridors became battlefields. The professors fought with the specific contained ferocity of people defending something they'd spent their lives inside. Harry and Hermione moved through it with Ron on their left and Neville Longbottom on their right, because Neville had been running Dumbledore's army through the year of the occupation and had arrived at the battle with the specific quality of someone who has been ready for this for longer than anyone asked them to be. They moved through the fighting with the focused efficiency of people who have a mission inside the chaos, not fighting for the sake of it but moving toward the objective with every engagement as clean as they could make it. The castle fought with them. Harry had always known the castle was alive in some fundamental sense, had felt it since childhood, the warm attention of the building, the way it responded to need and intention. He'd never seen it fight before. The staircases moved to cut off Death Eater advances. The suits of armor activated with a purpose and precision that their usual lumbering made seem impossible. Rooms sealed and opened on strategic logic that no human commander had time to calculate. Peeves, glorious, terrible 900-year-old Peeves, dropped suits of armor from a height that the castle seemed to be specifically choosing for him. And the portraits moved. Every portrait in the castle was moving. Not fleeing, not hiding, moving with purpose, carrying information through the network the way they'd always carried information, but at war speed now at the pace of a battle. McGonagall's plan was relayed through the portrait network faster than any spell could carry it. Warnings moved from corridor to corridor through frames that had been in place since the school was built. Harry, sprinting through the 6th floor, heard Godric's voice from a portrait frame as he passed. "Third corridor has 4 Death Eaters, go left," and turned left without breaking stride. The Founders were everywhere. Not physically, not in the way they'd never been able to be physically, but through the building's bones, through 900 years of inhabiting these walls until the walls were as much them as the portraits were. The castle knew them the way it knew its own foundations, and they moved through it as only its builders could. And the effect was the effect of 4 people who had spent a millennium becoming part of a building finally using that relationship in full. Harry found the snake. Nagini was in the boathouse, which made sense. Voldemort kept her close to himself, and he was at the edge of the grounds, watching, directing from the perimeter in the careful way of a general who has learned that his value is in coordination. Harry had known Nagini was the last Horcrux since August, had known she was the hardest because she was alive and Voldemort's attachment to her was genuine in the only way Voldemort was capable of genuine things. He went in. Hermione was on his left, Neville was behind them. The boathouse was dark and smelled of water and old wood and the specific cold signature of the Horcrux, and Nagini was coiled near the far wall in a configuration that suggested she'd been directed to wait here, which meant Voldemort was coming. She looked at Harry, he looked at her, he spoke to her in Parseltongue. Not a command, not a threat, he spoke to her the way he'd spoken to the basilisk in the chamber, the way Salazar had taught him to speak to living things. From the truth, from beneath the logic. "You don't want this," he said. "You've been used by him the way everything he touches gets used. You didn't choose this." Nagini looked at him with the amber eyes of a thing that was partly animal and partly something else, something that Voldemort's influence had made, and she said nothing, but she was still. Neville moved. Neville Longbottom, who had started his Hogwarts career as a boy nearly paralyzed by self-doubt, and who had spent the last year running an underground resistance in an occupied school, pulled the sword of Gryffindor from what should have been a sorting hat. The hat appearing from somewhere in the chaos in the way that things needed for the right purpose tended to appear in Hogwarts at the right moment, and he moved past Harry with the specific focused calm of someone who has found the thing they were made for. And he cut Nagini's head from her body with a single clean motion. The boathouse went very quiet. Harry looked at Neville. Neville looked back at him with the straightforward expression of someone who has just done something significant and is choosing not to make it larger than it is. "Last one," Neville said. "Last one," Harry agreed. "The forest." He went alone. He told Hermione he was going alone, which was the only argument they'd ever had that she hadn't pushed back on, because she understood the theory. Rowena had made sure of that, had spent 3 days with Hermione going through every variable and every implication and every possible outcome until Hermione had the full picture, and her objection to the plan wasn't emotional but technical, and the technical objection had no solution. And because she trusted what Harry was doing the way Harry trusted her, she'd looked at him for a long time before he left. Then she'd said, "Come back. I'm going to try very hard," he said. It was not the same as obviously, they both knew it. He walked into the forest with the resurrection stone in his hand, found in the snitch, left for him by Dumbledore's last provision, the final piece of a dead man's plan that Harry had almost not appreciated in time, and the 3 turns and the dead came out of the darkness to walk with him. His parents. He'd spent his whole life knowing them through other people's love for them, through Helga's stories, through Godric's admiration, through Lupin's grief, through Sirius's friendship. Through the stag Patronus, through Snape's memory of a red-haired girl who had been kind to a child who needed kindness, through the echo in the graveyard that had been his mother's voice saying, "Run." They were here now, both of them, and Sirius and Lupin, all the dead who had loved him, standing in the cold air of the forbidden forest made real by the stone's magic. His mother looked exactly like he'd imagined, which meant she looked nothing like he'd imagined, because imagination never gets the living quality right, the specific warmth of her, the intelligence in her eyes, the way she looked at him with an expression that was entirely new and entirely ancient simultaneously. James Potter was shorter than the legend, that was the first thing. And he had Harry's hands, or Harry had his, and he smiled at Harry with a smile that had no performance in it, just the pure uncomplicated love of a parent for a child they'd had 14 months to know, and somehow 14 months had been enough to make this smile. "Are you?" Harry started. "We are here," Lily said. I know what I'm about to do." "I know," she said. "I know what it is, I know what it costs." She looked at him with the specific quality that only his mother could have, the look that said, "I've been watching you your whole life and I see everything you are. You are so ready for this." "I'm terrified," he said. "Yes," James said. "That's what makes you brave." Harry held that. "Is it going to?" He stopped. "When I come out the other side, if I come out the other side." "Rowena's theory is right," Lily said, with the calm of someone who is speaking from a vantage point that permits certainty. "I don't say that because I need it to be right. I say it because I was the first experiment in that theory, though I didn't know the theory then, and I know what happened from the inside." She paused. "It works. Trust her. Trust yourself." Sirius said, "I'm proud of you." He said it the way he'd said things in the short time Harry had known him, directly, without social cushioning, as though the directness was a form of respect. "I didn't get enough time with you. But I got enough to know what you are, and I'm proud." Lupin said nothing. He just looked at Harry with the expression of a man who is made entirely of warmth and has never had a sufficient container for it, and the expression said everything the words would have said. "I love you," Harry said. He said it to all of them, which was the only way to say it that was accurate. "All of you, everything I am is partly you." He let the stone fall from his hand. He walked into the clearing. Voldemort's killing curse hit him and he went somewhere that was white and empty and quiet. And in the white quiet he talked to Dumbledore, who was there in the specific form of a person who has taken the long way around, and Dumbledore said, "You have a choice." "I know," Harry said. "You always knew," Dumbledore said. "That was always the point of you, not the power, not the scar, not the prophecy. The fact that you always knew when it mattered what the right thing was, and you always chose it. Even when it cost something, especially then." Dumbledore looked at him with the expression that Harry now recognized as love, straightforward, unmanaged, the love of a man who had not always been good at loving things and had gotten better at it too late and was grateful for the chance to be clear about it now. "Go back, Harry. There's more left to do and more left to live." The fragment of Voldemort's soul was in the white space too, small and ugly, and making a sound that was the sound of a thing that has refused help for so long it no longer knows how to accept it. Harry looked at it for a moment. He felt no anger toward it, just a kind of clear, sad acknowledgement. This is what happens when power is the only thing you love. He went back. He came back into the world like coming up out of deep water, sudden and loud and full of the specific chaos of a battle that had continued while he was gone, and he lay still in the clearing and processed the fact that he was alive. The fragment was gone. He knew it before he checked, knew it the way you know when something that's been with you for a long time is absent, the specific quality of silence where there used to be weight. The scar was still there, but it was just a scar, just a mark, nothing looking back at him through it. He stayed still until he understood the situation, which took about 30 seconds. Voldemort thought he was dead. Narcissa Malfoy, leaning over him with the specific focused quality of a woman with exactly one priority, asked him in a whisper if Draco was alive inside the castle, and he whispered yes, and she told Voldemort he was dead. The walk to the castle, the carried body. Neville, recognizing the sword's moment with the snake, the moment when Harry came back to life in the middle of the Great Hall, standing up from where they'd laid him, and the silence that fell over the whole room. Voldemort's face when Harry stood up was the most unguarded thing he'd ever seen on it. Every performance gone. Just the raw face of something that has hit a wall it was sure wasn't there. "The part you never understood," Harry said, walking forward, wand in hand, the whole hall having moved back to give them room in the specific way of people who understand they're watching the decisive thing, "is that I was never trying to survive for my own sake. I was trying to survive for everyone else's. That's why the curse doesn't take, that's why it's never taken. You keep casting it at someone who isn't afraid to die, and you can't kill someone who isn't afraid to die for the right reasons." "Prophecies," Voldemort said, and the word was a hiss of contempt. "Nothing to do with prophecies," Harry said. "Everything to do with what I was taught." He stopped 10 feet away. "You know who taught me. You've known for 6 years and you could never account for it because you couldn't understand what it meant that 4 people who have been dead for 900 years looked at 2 orphaned children and decided they were worth loving." He looked at Voldemort steadily. "That's your blind spot. You've had it since you were 11 years old and you never found a way around it. Love as a force, not sentiment, not weakness, power, older than any magic you know." Voldemort cast. Harry blocked and cast back, and the exchange was brief and decisive and had the quality of inevitability rather than surprise, not a duel between equals but the final movement of something that had been in motion for 17 years coming to rest. The killing curse met its own rebounded echo in the specific paradox of magic that cannot touch what it has already defined as its own failure, and Voldemort fell. No dramatic dissolution, no theatrical darkness. He fell the way people fall when they die, completely without qualification, without the anchors that had been propping him up for decades. Gone. The great hall was very, very quiet. Then Neville said, "Well," in the tone of someone summarizing a long evening. Then Ron made a sound that had no word for it. Then the hall came alive. Harry found Hermione in the crowd, and she found him at the same moment, because they'd been finding each other for 16 years, and the instinct had long since become physical. She came through the press of people with the specific focus she had when the only destination was the one she was moving toward, and she reached him, and she did something she'd never done before. She put her arms around him and pressed her face to his shoulder, and held on with the complete absence of reserve, which was rare for Hermione because she was a person who lived inside herself and didn't usually let the outside match the inside. He held on back. "You came back," she said, muffled. "I said I'd try very hard. That is the most annoying thing you've ever said." She didn't let go. "I know." They stood like that for a while. Around them, the hall was full of the noise of people who have been through something enormous together and are only beginning to understand the size of it, grief and relief, and the particular human sound of people who are alive, checking that other people are also alive. Ron had his mother's arms around him and was looking over her shoulder at the two of them with the expression of a person who is overwhelmingly relieved and also finding it somewhat difficult to breathe. Neville was sitting on the floor with the sword across his knees, looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone who has discovered what they're capable of and is still processing the implications. Draco was in the corner with his mother, both of them whole, both of them present, both of them looking at the hall with the expressions of people who have stepped out of one story and into another and are not sure yet what the new story is. Narcissa Malfoy had her hand on her son's arm and was looking at Harry across the room with an expression that Harry would have needed Rona's vocabulary to fully describe, complex, layered, specific, and he met her gaze and nodded once, and she nodded back. Susan Bones was organizing. She had her wand out and a list in her head, and she was moving through the hall with the focused efficiency of a person who had been raised by Amelia Bones and had absorbed every lesson, directing the injured to the hospital wing and the dead to the east corridor and the confused to food, because Susan's management of any situation included food as a strategic element. Harry watched all of it. He stood in the middle of it and let it be real. He went to the sitting room when the hall had found its rhythm and the immediate crises were in other capable hands. He went alone, and then he sat down on the hearthrug, his hearthrug in his room in the castle that had been his home for 16 years, and he looked at the 4 portrait frames. They were all there. Of course they were all there. Godric was in his frame with his armor on, and his chin up and his eyes doing something that he would never in 900 years acknowledge was crying, which was the most Godric thing Harry had ever seen. Helga was in her herb garden with her hands folded, and her expression entirely open, which was Helga's version of saying everything at once. Rowena had her book and she was not reading it, and she was not pretending to read it, which meant she had decided to stop pretending to be composed, and that felt like the most significant event of the evening so far. Salazar was in the dark frame and he was facing front, which was unusual, and there was nothing performed about his expression at all. It was simply a man's face looking at a person he loved. Harry sat with them. "I have to say something," Harry said. "You don't," Helga said. "Not to us, I want to." He looked at all 4 of them. "You took 2 kids with nowhere to go and you gave us everything you had. You gave us your knowledge and your time and your history and your honest opinions even when they were hard to hear, and he started again. You loved us not because we were useful or remarkable or destined for anything, because we were there and we needed loving." The sitting room was quiet. "You made us what we are," he said. "Everything that worked tonight, every spell, every calculation, every decision that landed right, that's you, all 4 of you." He paused. "I wanted you to know I know that. I wanted you to hear it from me specifically." Helga said, "We know. I know you know," he said. "I'm saying it anyway because that's what family does." She smiled, and it was the warmest thing in the room. Godric made the not-sob sound and looked aggressively at the painted ceiling of his frame. Rowena pressed her lips together and then very quietly said, "You were the best students I ever had, both of you, and that is not a small thing." Salazar was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Harry with the expression that had taken Harry years to understand, the expression that Salazar wore when he was feeling something he had never in his life had a comfortable relationship with, and had stopped pretending he didn't feel. "I was wrong about many things," Salazar said. "For a very long time. And then you were here, and you and Hermione were here, and it became impossible to keep being wrong. The specific mechanism of that," he paused, "was you being unafraid of me from the beginning in the way that children are unafraid of things they've grown up with. You never looked at me and saw the legend or the worst history. You looked at me and saw a person." He held Harry's gaze. "I don't know what I gave you. I don't know if what I gave you was worth what I asked you to understand about where I came from and what I'd done. But I want you to know that everything I could give, I gave, with everything I was. Harry said, I know, and then, thank you for all of it. Salazar held his gaze for a moment longer. Then he gave the smallest possible nod, which was as close as Salazar Slytherin came to saying, You're welcome and I love you and I'm proud of you, and I have been since you were 5 years old sitting on this hearthrug asking me about snakes. Harry understood all of it. Hermione came to the sitting room an hour later and sat beside him on the hearthrug without being asked, which was the specific intimacy of knowing someone well enough to know where they'll be. She was still in her battle robes, slightly singed at the hem, her hair doing the thing it did when she'd been through something at speed. All of them still here, she said, looking at the portrait frames. All of them, Harry said. She sat with them for a moment. Then she looked at Helga's frame with the particular quality she'd never lost, the specific grateful attention of a 3-year-old who had been sat with through the worst night and had never forgotten it. Thank you, she said quietly. To Helga specifically, for the very first things, for all of it. Helga said, Oh, my love, thank you for letting me. Ron appeared in the doorway, slightly disheveled, holding 3 pieces of treacle tart that he'd apparently obtained from the kitchens because Ron responded to significant events with food and had done so since Harry had known him. He looked at Harry and Hermione on the hearthrug and at the 4 portrait frames full of the people who had built them both, and he said, Room for one more. Obviously, Harry said. Ron sat down on Harry's right, distributed the treacle tart, and ate his own piece with the focused appreciation of a person who has earned it, looking at the portraits with the expression he'd had every time he encountered the Founders since first year, the wide-eyed, uncomplicated wonder that had never quite calcified into the ordinary, that still found it genuinely extraordinary every time. Mad, Ron said. Your whole life is genuinely mad. My life is excellent, Harry said. Both, Hermione said. They sat there, the 3 of them, in the sitting room that Harry had been sitting in since before he could remember, in the building that had been his home since the night the world broke and the people who loved him most were dead, and 4 ghosts had looked at a sleeping baby on a staircase and made a decision that changed everything. Outside, the sun was coming up. The castle was full of people. People who had fought and grieved and survived. People who were already beginning the long, difficult work of figuring out what came after the ending. It was not a quiet world, and it was not a finished world, and there was so much left to do. The ministry to rebuild, the laws to change, Sirius's name to formally clear, Snape's story to tell so the world could understand what he'd actually been, the conversations with Draco that would take years to have fully, the 100 political and social and personal and magical tasks that followed a war. But it was a morning, and they were in it, and the 4 oldest people Harry knew were in their frames watching the light come through the castle windows with the specific quality of attention that belonged to people who had been waiting for this morning, not metaphorically but literally for 900 years, in the way that things old enough to love something across centuries wait for the specific morning when the thing they love turns out to be all right. What are you going to do? Hermione asked. Not tomorrow, not the specific logistical next. The real question, the one that lived under the surface of the morning. Harry thought about it. He thought about law, about the Aura program he'd been provisionally interested in and genuinely ambivalent about the teaching position McGonagall had hinted at 3 years ago with the specific pointed hint of someone planting seeds. He thought about Sirius, who was going to need someone to help him remember how to exist in a world that had moved on. He thought about the long project of Draco Malfoy, which was not finished and might not be finished for years, and which Harry intended to see through because that was the kind of person he was. He thought about the sitting room and the fire and the 4 frames and everything they contained. I'm going to live, he said. Actually live, not just survive. He looked at the morning light on the castle walls. There's a difference, and I've been taught it. Hermione smiled. It was the specific smile she saved for things she'd been waiting for him to say. Ron ate the last piece of treacle tart. In the portrait frames, 4 people who had been dead for 900 years and had spent 900 years loving a castle and everything it held, watched the sun rise over Hogwarts and were, each in their own way, entirely and completely at peace. Godric said, That's my students, and it was.